all this. Thank you. Hey, Watron, how are you?
Good. How are you, Gerald?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you so much for your very insightful comments at our discussion board. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, no. It's so nice to have, I was telling Lindsay,
mhm.
you guys in education and social work and certainly in biology, right? You guys
Yeah.
are the champions of some of the things we're going to be talking about today, experiential learning, because you actually get out there and try to apply, what the students are learning in order for them to actually graduate, right? So I was thinking about that this morning, and in history, our experiential learning, probably the silver bullet, the epitome of experiential learning for historians is study abroad, right? So
Yeah.
that where we actually get them into a different culture where they're actually surrounded by experiencing history, culture, architecture, going to places where extraordinary events happened,
Yes.
and and that's a very small percentage of any college students at university, let alone at Newman, right, have that
Hmm.
community. So so yeah, no, I'm excited about learning from you guys on insights on teaching skills.
Well, thank you, Gerald. You're being too humble. But for
Oh,
me personally, I'll keep trying. Yeah.
oh, no. I just I think I wrote back to your response. I just said, in the classroom, in the face-to-face, we rely upon good old-fashioned human communication,
Hmm.
right? And in the humanities, we teach by telling stories typically.
Yes.
Um, and we are therefore modeling, right? I was thinking about Gary's discussion about writing and things, right? And so we model storytelling. So we model a communication, a written style, an oral communication style that has a beginning, a middle, and an
Hmm.
end, right?
Yep.
And somewhere along the way, we're making sense of the story that we're telling. So that's our analysis. And we use it through oral cues, but also facial and body.
Yes.
And in the process, we're modeling for our students their ability to, or their skills to do the same thing, to take verbal and facial and body language cues to see if we're communicating. So, and that's just what I do. And I've been working on that, specifically working on that, for decades.
Mm.
And so I think those are good skills to have, but in a virtual environment, I have lots to learn, right? Because I can't necessarily see if it's working. So anyway, I don't know. Very, very interesting comments. And so I appreciate it.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you, Gerald. Thank
oh,
you.
of course, going forward.
Mhm.
It's hard to get everybody excited about day 2 of a Zoom test. So I'm glad people are here. Hey, Christy, how are you? Oops, can't hear you.
It's Shark Week. This is a happy week at my house. This is the one week where my girls will sit down and we will watch TV together and we will gasp and we will eat popcorn, and it is hilarious. And I look forward to it every year. It's so weird. I learned so much about sharks last night. My youngest is now, both of them want to be shark scientists, which is adorable. And then Did you know there's this like the Jackass group goes out and they do dumb stuff with sharks? Oh my God. It's just insane. Anyway, brilliant. I was thinking about like what we were talking about yesterday about how we communicate and we educate. I learned more about sharks in this 30-minute little thing than I could have, and it was totally entertaining. And I thought, I wish I could teach like that, right? Like, but I don't teach about sharks, so it's never gonna work. Anyway, Cheryl, it's all good. Welcome everybody.
But actually, Christy, you can. So one of the things that I've been playing with is how to simplify lessons, something that I lecture on for 30 or 45 minutes into a 6-minute bite. Make it make it engaging, lots of visuals to pair with, because I have those dual learners. And the students are liking the more quippy, short bites of information and a lot packed into one thing, and then we unpack it later.
Yes.
So maybe we can. It's just about us changing the way that we've been doing things for so long.
Yeah, it's all about, I was thinking about that last night too, Lizzie. I was thinking it's like riding that rail between entertainment and education and trying to get to that sweet spot where there's a takeaway and you don't even realize it's happening and you're engaged, but it also doesn't diminish the value of the content.
Right.
So hard to do, and the Shark Week people have freaking nailed it. So I'm a fan. If you guys haven't watched it, there's one where they do research on sharks and shark like breaches, and I was just fascinated. I was like, scientific discovery with sharks. That's brilliant. You can do it with anything, kids.
Oh, fantastic. Now I was watching a little interview with Jordan Peele this morning, and you may know Jordan Peele. He's, Get Out is.
Yeah, we're going to see Nope tonight, Cheryl. Are you going to see it?
I don't know, because when you were talking about sharks and the way that Jordan Peele, enters the world and thinks about the role of society and African Americans in society and such, he teaches us with comedy and horror. And so that's what I'm thinking about with Shark Week. It's comedy and horror. And of course, he's bridged that extraordinary cinematic divide where we're no longer doing Black exploitation films, right? We're doing films that we all get and we all understand, no matter our cultural background. And he's teaching us, but he's including us, talking middle America white folk, in the joke, but also in the lesson. So I don't know. I just wonder if we can combine sharks and Jordan Peele and figure this out.
Oh, and Shonda Rhimes, and I'm sure you've seen Blackish, the TV show.
Yeah.
There's a couple episodes of it that I've started showing in a couple of my classes, like American Minorities, because I'm like, this episode does in 30 minutes what I could do in like 3 days, talking about historical precedent and like, Juneteenth. Like kids didn't know that until we watched that episode. It was brilliant. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is what Watchwan and I started talking about from the beginning, with storytelling, and how the humanities kind of feels like we have a lock on, this idea of storytelling, but we don't. And so it's this, if you can tell the story effectively, right? Even if that's in just brilliant directing and writing of a comedy, man. So so I don't know. I'm not sure I'm gonna go see Nope, because I know will scare the living daylights out of me. I was a big West Wing fan, and to have Bradley Whitford, sorry, spoilers, in the earlier one just freaked me out. I won't say anything more. If you haven't seen Get Out, you have to go see Get Out, because you will sit on your living room sofa, and at least once, and for me it was probably like 4 times, you will yell at the TV, "Get out!" Yeah, you will do that. So we're talking about engagement, we're talking about teaching methods, and it looks like just about everybody's here. I'm looking for Greg. Greg will be here, I'm sure. He's running perhaps a bit behind this morning. He's got a full house himself when it comes to interactive living and learning, etc. So he's terrific. So our goals today, we have a chock full day again. We're looking at pedagogy, right? So we'll talk a little bit about some of the materials you've taken a look at on pedagogy and a lot of the terms that we all use, perhaps interchangeably. We'll also hear from Gary on some of his experiences in teaching and working with program development at WSU. And then we'll probably try to spend the last segment of our time working on the design that we have put together so far for our certificate in the emphasis in technology and human values. It is a work in progress. And one of the cool things about this collaborative, interactive Zoom meeting we're having is that we're going to learn from each other a lot of things. I was just telling, I wrote on Lindsay's contribution at the discussion board that we in the humanities have so much to learn from the professions with regard to experiential learning, integrative learning, because you guys have to do it in order to get your folks licensed, right? Or prepare them for the next step in their professional journey, which might be a master's program where they're going to get licensed in some way. So, so yeah, that's one great thing about this Humanities Connections setup is that, you know, the NEH is sponsoring it to celebrate the humanities, but we in the humanities world have got to learn how to be more effective. And why not start with the professional programs, because you guys are killing it. So, so that's where we are. Jamie and I exchanged some emails last night, and we wanted to make sure if that there weren't any issues or ideas that people sort of had hanging around from yesterday that we want to reflect more on. I noticed that David sent us all an email because David went out and did some research. And did you want to tell us a little bit about that? David, and you're going out and reviewing some of the things that Gary had submitted, and then I didn't have a chance to read your whole email. So do you want to kick us off with a little reflection on yesterday?
Yeah, sometimes I write to clarify my own thoughts. So thanks for being my audience, even
great.
just to receive the email. But yeah, you know, so yesterday I was really down on using data in human contexts like this. And, you know, I'm aware that corporations use it to target advertising, right? But for a state to use it to potentially send somebody into your house, right, with shoddy evidence, right, really got to me. I'm a foster and an adopted parent, so you know I'm sensitive to these things. But by the time that I reviewed and read the article in the New York Times that Gary mentioned, and the materials that Jamie and also Lindsay identified from the Allegheny website, it appears that since 2016 they've done a lot of work to really improve that process. And from the outset, you know, and even Eubanks notes that the algorithm was intended to inform decision making, right? She worries that practitioners may treat it as law, right? To dictate their behavior rather than to inform their responses. But then the fact that it's nested in what seems to be a pretty decent process of review, evaluation, bringing in outside parties, including from, you know, other reputable researchers to evaluate it from an ethical standpoint. It seems to be nested within a pretty decent process of review and improvement. They ditched one of the original algorithms and its goals because it wasn't producing much value. And it did seem to be the shoddier of the attempts they had made. So that's a good thing. And then the one they kept, as they've developed and tweaked it, there does seem to be evidence that it is helping them make statistically valid improvements on both reducing false positives, right? Going into houses you shouldn't, and reducing false negatives, and it's missing cases that you want to protect a child. If that's the case, right, if we're gaining, helping a few fewer kids and reducing invasions of houses that we shouldn't really invade, then, you know, I start being in favor again, especially if this is undergoing an ongoing review process. One of the things that struck me too was when Lindsay pointed out that one of the things she sees especially lacking in the use of data here in Kansas is, you know, that feedback loop should ideally include not only experts, but those who are impacted
Right.
Right. And I think that would be something really interesting to explore, you know, bringing in families and folks who are at the receiving end of these things for part of that review process. So those are my updated thoughts. And I'll stop there.
I appreciate those, David. You know, there's a Catholic social justice principle called subsidiarity, which means that people who are involved in the decision should be involved in the decision-making process. People are going to be affected by that
Yeah.
decision. It used to be in the faculty handbook at Newman and quietly was removed and never seen again. So,
Yeah.
so I like that idea of including the people who are impacted, but also just in your letter, your email, I was kind of reading as you were talking a little bit, so I might have missed a little bit here or there, but one of the things that I really like about that is that the ethical review by a third party.
Mhm.
I mean, that just seems like a really phenomenally good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I recommended a book yesterday about, you know, we put into place in the history of American culture processes for determining knowledge and what counts as valid, you know, arguments and evidence for 200 years in this country, right, based on Enlightenment principles. And we had to develop institutions to help us do it. And so that work goes on into how we can do it in the age of social media. But, you know, to keep track of the idea that however many blind people are trying to feel the elephant, there's still an elephant, right? And to improve our grasp on this elephant is really important, right? And so to me, I just think that's fundamental. And in this case, you know, is the elephant stepping on people it shouldn't be stepping on? I think is one really important question to be pulled into here.
Cheryl, we can't hear you.
I was just praising your analogy. Thank you.
Sure.
I want to echo the thanks. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. It really, to me, points up the fact that data-driven tools can be extremely powerful, and things that are powerful can also be dangerous. We need to handle them with care, but that is far from saying that they are bad or destructive. And I don't even think Eubanks is saying that. But she is raising some questions, and those questions are what compels the people who own and administrate these tools to be vigilant about their use, to worry about things like slippery slopes or you know, lack of inclusion of people who are being affected in the process. So I think that this one, especially after you're having taken a closer look at it, seems like they're doing most of the right things. But they're also one of the tools in this regard that is getting the most attention. They're one of the first and most prominent organizations to use this approach. What's going to happen when other counties, other jurisdictions start using tools like this and don't have the same kind of spotlight on them? You know, people in those communities need to learn the lesson as well, to kind of bring attention, ask questions, apply pressure to make sure that other places take the same careful steps that Allegheny County has.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder here, this, because what you all are talking about is, you know, a process of development and review. And when the algorithm is helping us, or we're hoping that it's helping us support some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And then maybe that gets the attention, right? That gets the outrage, that gets advocates coming forward. But when that algorithm is helping us clean up the streets of crime, or something where those communities may not be so endearing to the general population, right? How do we continue to apply those same ethical issues to, again, algorithms that are following us around all the time? Yeah, no, very good. Other thoughts, especially if you felt like you didn't have a chance to dive in yesterday, because again, some of us are very vocal, as Greg was pointing out yesterday. Any other thoughts before we we move forward. We're hopefully having lots of discussion today, so I don't want to cut anybody off. But I also do want to be respectful of everybody's time as well. So any other thoughts or ideas that sort of you didn't get a chance to express yesterday?
Okay, yeah, my thoughts may not be that valuable, but anyhow, it's also inspired by David's email this morning. I just want to say that there's nothing wrong, and probably it's the right thing to do for everybody to hold a suspicious or critical attitude about any data collection tool or method. Maybe we can say actually there is no perfect or perfectly airtight, watertight instrument for data collection. And it should be for any research or study, it should be an ongoing process to constantly improve the accuracy of the method. And there might be better ones than the others. And so that's already some kind of success. And I also thought about the difference. I don't know whether this is valid. The differences between the populations or participants or the families studied or the data were collected from. So the Allegheny County, because I studied there for 5 years, living in an area close to Pittsburgh, but it's in the country. So Allegheny County has 1.2 million people only, and at least a quarter of the population are concentrated in the Pittsburgh area. So I don't know whether there are some differences between those 1/4 and the rest of the rest would be in little towns like the one I studied in. There might be differences, and I would assume those so-called relatively poor families would be would more concentrate in the urban area. Yeah, and probably the participants were concentrated in there. I don't remember whether that's mentioned or described in the study in a book. Yeah, just to throw it out there.
That's a good point. I'm reminded that Virginia Eubanks is coming to visit with us in February, and those kinds of questions and others like them, think about those. We'll probably be polling you guys after we're done to say, okay, she's coming in February. She wants to be well prepared. What do we want her to do? I mean, what kinds of things do we want her to talk about with this group? So, so think about that. No, great. I should also tell you, Watchwan, you said, we should all be very suspicious. It was very interesting. I got an email yesterday afternoon, not long after we all signed off, from Virginia Eubanks. She had some paperwork to do for me, and she password protected the actual PDF that she sent me. Just saying. So she had to not only send me the password protected PDF, but then she had to send me a separate email giving me detailed instructions on how to access the password protected PDF. I know. So, and I'm laughing, but she's, if anybody would know, it's her. So, so very cool. Anything else before we move on? All right. Well, thank you very much. We talked a little bit at the beginning about our plan, and I'm going to try really hard not to overwhelm you with too much information. But there you have it. So let's see if I can do this properly. Let me do my screen share. Here we go. And one of the things that we gave to you to take a look at, very short articles, but Watchwan and Lindsay are very, very involved in education theory. And so there's a real good chance they just read these and said, oh, yeah, give me something new to look at, Charles. I apologize if any of this was sort of beneath your pay grade, but a lot of the times when we're thinking about how to design the best educational experience for students, we oftentimes get tripped up on definitions and ideals. So that was one of the things that I was kind of wanting to run through a little bit this morning. So last time we met, a couple of years ago, we looked at Joseph Aoun's book called Robot Proof, and this is higher education in the age of artificial intelligence. And again, he's one of these advocates that says that there are skills to be learned in the humanities, skills to be learned in the professions, and we've got to figure out how best to train our students for the 21st century. So he is suggesting that there are certainly some skills, some competencies that are machine proof. I don't know if you saw the news this morning, but in Russia, they were having a big chess match between a robot and a series of children. They had this big table and they had 6 or 7 children who were playing against a robot, and the robot was playing all the boards. And one child decided to move his piece a little faster than he should have, and the robot came and grabbed his little hand and actually broke his little finger, saying, no, child, you may not move your piece yet. So there are certain skills that human beings have going ahead of robots. And Aoun says, there is certainly some humanities-based skills and competencies, first off, hopefully not breaking the finger of your chess opponent, that are integral to students, to help students succeed in the 21st century. We talked about a lot of those last time, but one of the things I thought we might think about today a little bit is this idea of technological literacy, data literacy, and human literacy, right? That technological literacy can be defined in so many different ways. But it certainly is for most of us involved in communication, involved in research, even analysis, right? Data literacy. We've talked a lot about this last time we met, and then certainly hopefully today a little bit. This idea, can one read a spreadsheet? Can one actually use a database, even the most basic one that comes with your software package on your laptop, right? So what kind of technological literacy do we have? What kind of data literacy do we have? And then that whole idea of human literacy, Watchwan and I were talking about that earlier when we came in. How do you read verbal cues, facial cues, body language when you're considering decision-making, communication at the most basic? This is from the Chronicle of Higher Education. The machines are coming. But human creativity, Jamie would like us to remember, the ability to communicate within and across cultures, the historian would advocate for, and critical and systems thinking that I think all of us would advocate for, will sustain our future. In the Chronicle for Higher Education, when they say our future, they mean the future of human beings. So yes, in the face of artificial intelligence, so technological literacy, data literacy, human literacy. I think we do indeed teach these things at Newman University. I think most colleges teach these. They don't necessarily do so in a way that students understand the importance of these specific skills. So how do we teach them? The things that I'm going to be advocating for today, and maybe you'll have a different approach to it, which would be terrific. Let me know, is thematic study across disciplines. And that's what we're thinking about with the certificate that we're developing. The idea of themes going across disciplines, project-based learning, students getting their hands into something, their heads wrapped around a complex idea, and then real world connections. Again, this is coming from an ancient historian, right? It isn't hard for me to find real world connections in the work that I do. That's what keeps ancient history relevant. And people keep doing the same damn stupid stuff. History never repeats itself. It's just that human beings, Greg can tell you, have behavioral problems that they just seem not to be able to get beyond. So there you have it. We'll be looking at pedagogical definitions and ideals, right? So we'll hear about interdisciplinary. We'll hear about integrative. We'll then think about experiential, right? And in all of the survey data that we do as a university, people always want to know, what kind of high impact practices do you have at Newman University? So we'll take a look quickly at interdisciplinary versus integrative versus experiential as we move forward here. Do feel free to holler at me. I'm going fast. I hope you're all caffeinated. So interdisciplinary, you all know this because this used to be what we thought of in many ways. And the Newman Studies program was essentially based, a lot of the thinking was based upon this idea of interdisciplinarity, right? Interdisciplinary can be an actual major, right? At a university, we don't see it that often, but it can be an approach to study, or it can just be that you're studying a particular topic from more than one academic discipline, right? So that you give each discipline its due, its methods, but you tackle that one topic from two different perspectives, right? And I'm sure many of you have examples. We'll get into that. Integrative. And this is what's more interesting to me, because I think this is probably really what I do more as opposed to interdisciplinarity. It's the process of making connections among concepts and experiences so that information and skills can be applied to new and to complex issues or challenges. So it's this idea of helping students develop the ability to make connections, right? Not only to solve the assignment you've just given them, but also to then take that ability, that way of thinking and apply it to other things beyond your classroom. So today's integrative approaches, and this is coming from the sources that we looked at for today, include opportunities that connect not only the ideas you're working on in your classroom, but maybe even connect your classroom to your campus. What's going on today? Christy's very famous in her classes for saying, hey, what's in the newspapers today? How does that relate to what we're going to talk about today? And she's very deft. She's very clever and very deft at starting off with a current event and bringing it back around to the big issue she was going to talk about today anyhow, right? So taking what happens in your classroom and making it apply to your campus, perhaps taking what happens to your campus and making it apply to the wider community. So integrative learning through intentional integrative learning, students can build an understanding across the curriculum and their co-curriculum or their extracurricular activities. Students can go from making simple connections, say in a course among ideas and experiences to synthesizing, right? And then transferring such learning to new, more complex situations within and beyond the campus. We may not be able to teach them how to do that, right? But if we can model it, if we can give them opportunities to practice, right? We might actually make a dent.
Hey,
So,
Cheryl.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in a comment. I'm remembering one of the most interesting or useful for me concepts from Alan's book, the Robot Proof book. In the context of integrative learning, he talks about transfer, and there's near transfer and far transfer. So near transfer is like students have to, and maybe some of you are familiar with this terminology, you write a paper and then that helps you transfer those skills to writing another paper later in the course or for a different course, something very similar. But far transfer is really where the kind of the money is, where the rubber meets the road, where you can take skills that you've learned in one context and transfer them to a completely different context and find that connection and apply it. And I think that's really kind of the payoff for integrative learning. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Absolutely perfect. Well done. Because as we hopefully will demonstrate to the group, those of us, David and Christy and Jamie and I have been working on this prototype, right, for our certificate. And that is the goal. The goal is to make this iterative, to make this the kind of certificate where students can actually see that they're improving their skills, they're handling more complex situations, right? And that they have the confidence to do that and the skill set to at least attempt it. So very good, thank you. Perfect. I enjoyed that Alan book a lot. I thought it was pretty, and I'm stealing a lot from all that for this. So experiential. So we talked about a little bit about interdisciplinary, integrative. Experiential. I guess we were starting off this morning. Most of our professional colleagues do this a lot better than our humanities-based people do. I can show slides of the Roman Colosseum and tell stories about gladiators, but you guys get them in the arena. Not to torture my metaphor too much. You get them there. And so we have a lot to learn from that. So experiential learning is action-based. Experiential learning can help people develop those skills, transfer those skills, as Jamie was saying, clarify their values, right? Not only their values as human beings, but their values as an accountant, their value as a police officer, right? And enhance their capacity to contribute to their communities. This is the jackpot for Newman University, right? Transforming society, getting students to actually believe that they can do it, right? And also experiential learning can help improve civic and global engagement. We're convinced of this, right? So experiencing, and there's all kinds of elements to that, but how to do it, So one of the things that we put up at Canvas for you to take a look at, and Rachel very kindly copied to put into your little file folders. I am not a fan of assessment. I have to be kinder and more appreciative of it, especially after that discussion with David and Gary about feedback loops. You know, I just got to be more appreciative. And one of the things that Jamie and I decided was that, you know, we should start with assessment first, right? We should do what we say we want people to do out in the world with technology and human values. And McGill up in Canada, McGill University actually has an assessment process for experiential learning. And so we cribbed from that. So they say experiential learning should be a mixture of content and process. There should be a balance between the activities and the underlying content and theory. I think we all know that. Engagement in purposeful, meaningful endeavors that encourage a big picture perspective, right? This is what we've been talking about. The activities must be personally and emotionally relevant and allow students to make connections between what they're learning and between the learning they are doing and the real world. Yeah, and I think that's the ideal, right? And the cool thing about this little rubric at McGill is it's, you know, I know we're looking at ethics and such, but I'm going to steal it. I think it's great. And I think we ought to just put Newman's logo on it and go with it. So the last part of their approach here is that we have to have opportunities for reflection. And that's one of the things we're trying to build into our little certificate, right? That students should critically reflect on their own learning. Students should make connections between their experiences to the theory that they've been studying in order to gain insight into themselves, their own value system, and their interactions with the world, right? Students can also consider how their new skills, their new knowledge and experiences are transferable to other situations or environments, including those outside of academia, right? We are so happy to get students into internships. We are so happy with that they're getting that really impressive professional experience. But for the most part, and I know you guys know this, when it comes to internships, internships are very helpful to students. Internships are very helpful to companies because they may have a chance to get new employees out of the mix. But internships ultimately are of most value to the university that helps to make that connection, right? Because the internship pipeline connects us to professionals in the field, but also helps our students to get that more and more students, if our current interns are successful, then our next interns and our next interns and our next interns, right? So having those connections are certainly valuable. Students certainly valuable to industry, but ultimately have the highest value to us because they cost us very little, except, as Gary will tell you, extraordinary amounts of time on the part of the professor. So we want our students and our graduates to be able to identify challenges and opportunities in their own field, but also beyond that. We want our students and graduates to be able to develop solutions and approaches to these challenges and these opportunities. We want them to engage their colleagues. We want them to engage communities in the process, right? So how can we create opportunities? Again, here we are for thematic study across disciplines that is project-based learning, has real-world connections that helps us to do all the things we said we wanted to do here, right? So if I can get past my little animations fast enough. So this is my wrap up. here in this little Zoom group, we have so many experts. We have so little time. You guys have tremendously, this team here represents a wealth of experience, a huge body of knowledge, right? And we all practice some form of integrative experiential learning already. So as Jamie may have warned you, once upon a time, in one of our emails, we would very much like to learn from you guys as to what has been some of the most effective integrative learning that you've integrative teaching and learning, some of the most effective experiences your students have had. Because again, we in the humanities, we really need to learn from you guys. And also, as we're building this certificate program, we want to try to avoid some of the classic pitfalls that people do on integrative and experiential learning. And we want to try to do it better. So any thoughts out there? I know Jenna's a biologist, and I'm assuming that, you know, the best integrative experiential learning techniques you guys have relate to the lab. But I don't know. I mean, that's just an assumption I would have, right? Maybe there are other things. I know Stacy Jones, God bless Stacy. Stacy brings her saxophone into lecture. She's laughing.
I wasn't aware of that. That's funny.
Oh, you should get her to come to class and play. Now, I have never heard Stacy play, and she may just be damn good. But I have a feeling it's not just to entertain folks or to work out her latest jazz riffs and such. There's got to be some reason she's bringing that saxophone into class.
I'll have to ask her next time I see her. I wasn't aware that she did that. I even had her as a student here ages ago. So
she did play sax for you?
I was not treated to that experience.
Oh,
That's so funny.
I don't know what's going on with her. Maybe she's lost her embouchure. So sorry, music people know what that means. So what about you guys in biology? I just always make assumptions that interactive learning, integrative learning, experiential learning, it's just part of the course. That if you can't pass lab, you can't pass biology.
Right. I think that it's embedded in our curriculum. I mean, we spend at least 2 hours a week with our students in the lab, really bringing principles from lecture content to their, you know, visualization and bring it to life. I think that outside of that lab experience where our students are really interacting with those concepts and trying to use tools that the scientific field have developed to interrogate those concepts, we do case studies, which is another thing that I think brings things to a more, I guess, integrative approach where they're not just thinking about how the concept works, but how it might apply to a real world situation. So I do a case study on cancer and in particular genetic engineering of T cells in order to combat cancer. So we bring in some lecture concepts there. We interact with something that they all know, which is, you know, the devastation of losing someone from that disease and the ethics surrounding the use of genetic technologies. So that tries to bring in a lot of different concepts there and maybe even some different fields. So if anyone wants to jump in while I'm speaking, feel free.
Have you had any experiences that kind of tell you what to do or not to do with case studies? Like, are there better case studies and worse case studies or ways of designing them?
I think, I don't know if other than having poor interaction around a question, for example, where the students are just kind of like, well, this isn't an interesting question. We don't really know how to address this or approach it. And, you know, I think that's the metric for me for saying this probably isn't really a very good case study, or I might need to modify this question so that it better relates to an experience that they are familiar with or pokes at some area of their understanding and extends it a bit. We do have case studies at the medical school where I'm also a faculty member now, and those are also really useful sort of discussions that we have with the medical students, and I can see how they interact at a higher level and try to get my students to kind of be on that level and be asking those questions and thinking very broadly. So I guess in terms of a good case study, I'd say that it needs to utilize concepts that they already know and are somewhat familiar with, and apply that to a scenario that they are at least cursorily familiar with, or maybe have a personal experience with in the real world, and allow them to kind of draw connections between that and even areas of ethics or, moral philosophy, that kind of stuff. So that to me is a good case study, but I'm of course open to anything that you guys think of.
That's great.
Yeah, fantastic. That does sound like sort of the silver bullet or the golden goose there, right? That this concept
Yeah.
of concepts they know so that they can build on it, some kind of personal connection,
Right.
and an ethical component.
Yep.
Yeah, you're in biology. I'm sure that comes up all the time.
It really does. And I think that it makes it really handy.
Yeah.
It's not very hard for us to find a space in which students have to, especially if they're pre-medical or in going into some medical profession or genetic counseling, but they really have to think about the implications of the knowledge that we have within our field and how that's utilized in society. So I think those two places are very obvious spaces in which we have more integrative learning, experiential learning, of course, in the lab. Not all of our students get the opportunity to do research, but we also have, primary biological research in our department, mostly led by Mike Bradley and myself. And so those are opportunities that we currently offer. And most of our pre-medical students or pre-professional students are also seeking out their own internships. So they basically are required as an entrance into whatever program to have a certain number of hours shadowing positions. So that's something that we try very hard to encourage them to do and find those resources. We don't have a formalized way of doing that within the university, but that might be something really useful to kind of provide that resource.
We're bringing our career services person in on next Monday. So
awesome.
yeah, this is Sarah Rupp. So put a bug, put a bug in her ear that you need more help with internships, supervision, and everything else.
That'd be awesome.
Internships are so important that we have a dedicated faculty for that, for monitoring, working with, having agreements with those places where we place the students to make sure that the students are meeting their learning outcomes, since it's tied to academic credit for our students.
That's a great idea.
You have a tremendous number of hours that your students are doing, right?
In the undergraduate level, our students are performing 450 hours over 2 semesters.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
I can see why you need a full-time person.
I think the same with education, right, Wojwan? You guys have built in the whole teaching internship or the practicum.
Yeah, so the internship, I didn't count the hours. It's basically a semester, 16 weeks of the internship. And before that, they have a lot of observations, and actually we call that practicum in different subject areas, because our students, they teach almost actually 4 areas. So they will observe different classes at different schools. Just different stages of preparation for their independent practice.
Other thoughts on integrative and experiential learning that maybe you conducted yourself or maybe even wished you could conduct?
It doesn't consist of a field component, but encased within a classroom. I wish I could share with you all the final reflection papers the students have been producing in deconstructing privilege. They are profound and moving reflective documents that show that the students engage the content, that show how they engaged it from their own discipline, how they engage their own personal lives, and how they're going to use the information in that course to build bridges with people or to be able to connect with people who are different from them when they leave the classroom or when they leave that experience. And to see in those reflections, and maybe I can pull some of them down and just de-identify them, to see the transformative nature, to see where they started with, they have to write a journal reflection every week for 15 weeks and turn that into a paper where they look back on those 15 journals or 14 journals and say, what did I learn? How did I learn? What new knowledge do I have? How does this affect my existing person? Even within that encapsulated classroom, to see that transformation every semester that I get to teach that class, it's probably one of the most rewarding things I get to do is grade their final papers, because of that integration of them really having some really deep and for some of them very transformative learning experiences to say, I had never imagined that that's what other people go through.
Are there some experiences in or out of the classroom that you're kind of facilitating for them that they're reflecting on in their journals?
So at the feedback from the NSP committee, really specifically from Nancy Baez, she said, I would really like the students to have some sort of required interaction activity. So we make them go to AJET's table talk and participate in a community conversation about a diversity topic. I know that that doesn't work for all students. So other things that if the timing of the table talks don't work for working adult students or other student athletes, I've encouraged them to go to a civic meeting and to watch, engage, and participate in some sort of civic meeting. So go sit in the county commission meeting or go sit in a school board meeting to really engage people who are different, who might think different, and to observe those things. And then they come back and they do a reflection assignment on that. And then they incorporate it obviously into the larger journal.
That's great.
I think Christy, I thought for a while, are you guys also doing things like that? For some reason, I was thinking you guys were going down to town hall, or you definitely hitting some of the court cases.
Yeah, I mean, part of during normal times, part of, I call them field trips. Because that gets the kids kind of pumped that, oh yeah, we're old people who get to go on field trips. And so, we definitely go into the jail. I haven't done it in 2 years, but hopefully, well, maybe not. I don't know. That's going down to jail. But then like out to prisons and work release facilities. I love taking them to the juvenile justice, the JDF, juvenile detention facility, and then taking them into the courthouse just to sit and watch and absorb and be in that environment. And I always remind the students, there's a lot of try before you buy, I think, approach to education, which is I think you got to get out of the classroom and get into the world to figure out, is this a good fit for me? And nothing beats, like, I can sit and opine and talk about that crap, but until you watch it play out, oh my goodness, there's just nothing that beats that. So it's exactly what Lindsay said. And then I always have them do somehow a discussion about like what they took, or a paper, or short, like hit it and quit it paper, where they talk about like what I learned in the classroom versus what I saw when I went to the jail. Those are always my favorite papers, because they're like, in the classroom, we talked about how jails are super safe places, but then we went in our trip and I was scared. And then I responded, I was planning on using you as my human shield the whole time we were there. So lots of field trips. There's not a lot of opportunity, kind of like with what Lindsay, I mean, in the field, there's not a lot of opportunities for them to do the job unless they commit to an internship because of confidentiality, because of safety concerns. But observations, I think, are completely underrated in all fields. Just going and watching people work is huge.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, I know we're getting close on time already, but I'm just to do a quick recap. I'm hearing things like labs, case studies, primary research, original research, internships, reflection papers, reflection discussions, things like journals, I'm hearing field trips. I like all these different terms, right? Because they might mean something different to different people. So journals, field trips, case studies, labs, reflections, both maybe oral and written, short discussions at Canvas, and then full-blown written reflections. Other ideas or other things that folks are doing maybe that we haven't really covered.
I'm curious also if anybody, and maybe nobody does, but has any kind of stories about what not to do or lessons learned from something you tried that maybe didn't work as well.
I'm not sure we have enough time for that.
I figured probably people just didn't have those experiences.
Oh, well, you know, we
Well-
were asking people to bring their successes, but yeah.
I was
golly.
gonna say, mine would be, not all guest speakers. I've learned the hard way that not all guest speakers are created equal. And particularly, I mean, I don't know in you guys' profession, but I sometimes forget that there are some burnouts. People that are like at that point in their career where they're more like burnout about it, and they're not high energy and they're not positive. And I've made the mistake of not putting some thought into, not is this person who's coming to talk to my students about what they do for a living able to talk about it, like their job, but are they still engaged? Are they still excited about what they do for a living? And the same is true with my field trips. Like, I'm to the point now where I know, like, if we get to go do a jail tour, I ask for specific detention deputies to be our leaders, because some of them will come at my students and tell them really negatives, and they're just piss and vinegar. And so I guess as far as, Jamie, if you were asking about negative experiences, when you think about experiential learning and active engagement, being intentional about, because there are people in every profession who are burnouts, and I don't want them near my students. That's like, now take your negativity elsewhere. And I hadn't thought about that until like I got into the education part of the puzzle, because as a practitioner, I didn't think about that. I thought, ooh, the students are so lucky they get to come. Now I'm like, no, not everybody should have access to students. Some people aren't built for it.
Yeah.
Excellent point. I'm really glad you brought up guest speakers, because guest speakers have been a very sort of typically an easy way to get a professional in the classroom, to get students access to someone who talks a different language, who is kind of, has that smell about them of coming fresh from that office with their very nice dry clean suit and their shiny shoes, and that they're just really this professional person that they all strive to be. And that is a good resource, but you're right, you got to get the right person. Let's see, we got somebody in the chat. Oh, good caveat, says watch on. Yeah. All righty. Well, again, we're trying to stay to a schedule. We want to give you guys a little break. Next up, we'll be talking with Gary and asking him to sort of reflect on some of these ideas and his own experiences. And we've already had great benefit from Gary already. I feel like we're using him and abusing him. So if we can, let's just take a quick break. And I've got 9:53 already, so we can come back about 5 after 10 and reconvene. If you have any other thoughts, feel free to bring them back when you come. Otherwise, thanks so much. Good start. Wow, everybody's so timely. That's so impressive.
Are we all back pretty much?
Oh, we have a few folks still chiming in.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good work, everybody. Thank you so much for all your, get all those juices flowing. And we will have more to say on how to be good teachers. I know I'm a lot more confident talking about teaching methods sometimes than I am about some of the other materials we're working on, so.
Yeah, same here. As I said yesterday, I am very much a beginner when it comes to experiential, integrative learning and things like that. And I'm a little embarrassed because some of these ideas seem so obvious. And I just haven't spent the time thinking enough about how to make them work in a philosophy context, but there are obviously a lot of ways to do that. So I appreciate those ideas in that brainstorming session, and maybe towards the end of today, we'll hear a little bit more about those and how some of those might even be introduced specifically into the program that we're developing here. But what we want to do now is hear from our guest from WSU, Professor Brooking, and it's my job to introduce him. And so I'm gonna flatter you now a little bit, Gary. So that's typical for how these introductions go, right? But we approached Gary because I have a good friend who works at WSU as an advisor in the honors college there. And I was just kind of chatting with her about this workshop. And she said, you should really talk to Dr. Gary Brooking. He's a really diverse thinker. I mean, he really knows engineering, but he's not one of these guys. I think this is how she described him. She's not one of these engineering professors who's like, oh no, I'm an electrical engineer, not a mechanical engineer, right? He thinks broadly about engineering. He has a broader perspective, and he's very interested in students and teaching and pedagogy. And he's just a really nice and very interesting guy. So I reached out to him, and he was gracious enough to not only accept our offer to come and present some ideas that might help our process, but really to be very enthusiastic and supportive. And as you're seeing, he's attending the entire workshop, which is fantastic. We're so happy to have you here. Just a little bit of a background, and I'm basically taking this from the WSU website. I won't read the whole thing, but very interesting background. Dr. Brooking is from Zimbabwe. Is that originally from Zimbabwe? And attended Cape Town University, where he got his Bachelor of Science. And then he's a bit of a global traveler, of course, being born in southern part of Africa, but coming to the United States for a master's degree at Clemson in bioengineering and a PhD from the University of Virginia in electrical engineering. So see, already there's some diversity there, bioengineering and electrical engineering. And then returned to Zimbabwe to lecture at a new university where he was involved in the development of the new electronics and computer engineering department. So that kind of program building is one of the things, as I was reading through the biography, that I thought, well, that's pretty helpful background. Then, Gary, you left academics to go into private practice for about 10 years. And again, that's a very valuable experience. So not only a global traveler, but kind of a career traveler, it sounds like. Then it says that you were focused primarily on information systems with a special focus on education. So you did that for 10 years, over 10 years. And then returned to Zimbabwe, joined the University of Zimbabwe, where you lectured in electrical engineering, restarted the master's program, and established links between industry and academics, resulting in several sponsored student projects. And then finally, in 2014, you somehow made it to Wichita State University. And you began as a lecturer, but you assisted in creating clinical focused student projects. So we earlier already talked a bit about project-based learning. And you also foster an entrepreneurial mindset in students. And we know we hear a lot from WSU about innovation and entrepreneurship, and those are really valuable things that I know we could probably do a little bit more with here as well. You mentioned, the biography mentions 2 companies have been established from these student projects, and perhaps you'll share a little bit more about those. And now you're the chair of the engineering technology department at WSU, and also founder and inaugural director of the certificate-based program of applied computing. So the certificate program background. So many of the things that we might have been looking for were all in one place. It was a really great fit under your areas of research interest. I mean, machine learning, engineering education, and interdisciplinary approaches. It's almost like some sort of advanced language model just did a search of our proposal for the grant and pulled out keywords and then put them together into a biography. So we're very happy to have you here. And we're looking forward to whatever you want to share with us about your background, your approach to teaching and program building and so forth. So thank you very much, Gary Brooking.
Oh. Well, thank you. No pressure. I think you said it all, so I'll take any questions. I share the same concern as Greg and Lindsay shared when they first started, that when Cheryl and James approached me, I had no idea what actually they were after, what to say. And what even scares me more is Cheryl refers me sometimes as an expert. I much prefer the word guest, because I certainly am no expert. And I think all that you guys already discussed is really my experiences. I'm not too sure I have much more to add or expertise to give you, but I'm happy to give you a little overview of kind of where I've been and some of the experiences that I've had. And when you just now earlier we were talking about it, and I said it also in some previous meetings, what are the pitfalls, or what are the things that have gone wrong that we could learn from? And that's the one disadvantage of being an eternal optimist. I never see failures. I just say, well, that didn't quite work, let's try it again. So when I look back, I can't really see any failures, and I hope I'll try and find some of those, or will give you some direction. I'm also a little intimidated in that I am an engineer, and surrounded by these really articulate group of faculty. And as an engineer, people ask me often, what's your native language? And I'll say C++, because it follows the rules. I'm not very good at English, and I'm not very articulate, so bear with me, and hopefully you'll get some things out of my experiences. So hopefully you see the share. Is it shared? You got it? Okay. Much better than looking at my face. I thought I'd when you apply for jobs and different promotions, you always need to go through and put together your teaching objective. And I thought that's probably a good way to kind of start. And I was going to give you a little bit of a background of me, but I think, Jamie, you really did a really good job of my background and what's influenced me to come up with this kind of current teaching objective that I have. And I put it up there because I think it does, as Jamie said, fits a little bit with what you're trying to do. And it's certainly what I feel. It's not that this guides me, I've written this out of what I've seen that I've done. It's kind of a retrospective objective, which is probably not the best way to do an objective. But Jamie mentioned that I'm from Zimbabwe, so I had that kind of opportunity and had that perspective from a developing country, and was able to travel a bit, which was great. So you mentioned the startup university that I was at, and one thing that came out of that, we were building at university, not just structures, so there was no buildings. We were in rented offices around the town. We were also building the curriculum 1 year at a time as we were going through it, which was a great experience for a young academic. And they had a required in what they called an attachment, which was really an internship for 1 year, and that fit between the third and the final year. And it wasn't my thought or my design, but it fell on me to kind of implement that and get it going for our department. And I think that was probably one of the most fundamental experiences I had to influence a lot of what I do today. So I do say that if this internship, apprenticeship, what do you want to call it, attachment, if it's done correctly, these are probably the highest level of applied learning that you can get for students. Because it was required, I mean, it was very difficult. It was difficult to get placements, so we had to guarantee we had enough placements for all the students because it was a requirement. Students had to do it. It was kind of easy for us at the time because it was free education. The government actually sponsored the co-op, so companies didn't have to pay. But companies soon learned in a short space of time that if they offered a little bit of bonus money, they'd get the better student. So, and it became a little bit competitive after a couple of years. So that was never really the problem. It wasn't the financing side, and we had small enough 30 to 40 students. So in our particular department, we were able to find a placement. We also had faculty, and I think it was already mentioned. I think that's what I don't know who mentioned. Lindsay's talked about it. We had faculty assigned to the internship. So I made sure that each faculty met at least once with the company beforehand to kind of structure the year experience. When I say year, it was 2 semesters, and so 32 weeks. And again, they met with the company and the student at least twice during each semester. These were graded, so there would be a grade and rubrics both from the faculty as well as from the sponsor would give feedback, and students would be required to write reports, and those were typically at the end of the semester. That's something I'd probably change if I had to do that again. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the success was not really the company, but it was the person. It was finding the right person in the organization, and people already said that. It was finding the right person. Often those weren't in the best companies and the high fly companies. So it's connecting with the right person, which is exactly what Christy said. Find the person that identified what your objective, what you're trying to do, kind of had a passion for people and students. So finding those connections and also ensuring that the faculty was engaged. When those two things worked, it was hugely successful. And this was over 25 years ago. And I still have students. In fact, most of the students I've kept in contact with have been over that period of time. Really a key part, I think, of their learning, their opportunities and the experiences. And produced great engineers. So what was interesting is the faculty that would be teaching in our department, we actually had a few faculty that said, I will not teach the part 5. So I will not teach the students that come back after the internship, because they know what they want, they're stroppy, they're answering me back, they ask me questions I can't answer. You know, there was some faculty that just felt completely uncomfortable teaching these, and that's how much of a change that kind of internship, or that attachment, as we called it, had, and was very, very influential. And then I left, as I said, in startup companies, and most of those startup companies were with students. So we spun off a couple of companies, and there was all with students that I'd either taught directly or had interned with me during the time, and that gave me great experiences in business and on the entrepreneurial side. Coming back to the University of Zimbabwe, one of the parts there that I think was very successful, was a very good learning opportunity for me, was we were successful to get a grant from the Royal Academy of Engineers to facilitate faculty internships. So this was we were designated as a hub for the region. So we had people from Mozambique, Zambia, even Dar es Salaam. So we had different universities coming into us where we would help get them train them up, faculty, to get ready to go out into industry, so that they had experiences that they could bring back into the classrooms, and hopefully create some more of the business and academic kind of linkages. And it was just going and pretty successful. Unfortunately, I left to come here. So, but I have heard that that's continued and been a great program. But those were great experiences for me that I've been able to bring in. Sorry. So my teaching objective, and really to summarize it, I like to use, and I'm stealing these words from a partner we work with, and that's curiosity, connections, and creating value. Those are the 3 pillars that I really try to affect what I do with the teaching and the students that I engage with. So I think those are 3 key components of what I try to achieve through the teaching. So I've kind of broken this up over those three different areas. So for me, creativity and curiosity is a precursor to creativity. And I think most of you, probably many of you know the study done by George Land called the NASA test, the Genius test. George Land, about, I think it was in the 50s, mid 50s, did this test, developed this test for NASA to kind of figure out or try and identify geniuses that NASA could employ. That could be these big think tank and work for them. And it really was a test that was more on looking at divergent thinking or lateral thinking, out the box type of thinking. And they thought they would try and look at it and with a group of children and do a longitudinal study. So they got, so some example of the questions would be, how many uses would you have of a paperclip? So a normal person would have 10 different uses for a paperclip. Somebody that would be at the genius level, they would refer to it, would have like 200 uses for a paperclip. And they'd say things like, well, what if the paperclip was made of foam rubber and we could sleep on it? What if it was 3 meters tall, metal, and we could climb buildings with it? So kind of really broad, kind of out the box lateral thinking. And those are the type of questions they asked. So they did the study with about 1,600 5-year-old students. And they gave them the test, and they found out that 98% of them scored in this genius level. Same group of students, 5 years later, they did the test and they dropped down to 30%. 5 years later, they did it again and dropped down to, I think it was like 12% or something like that effect. So really a big drop off in what they referred to as the genius, or losing our genius. And over the 10-year period, they also did the test with about just under 300,000 adults, average age of about 31. And those adults scored 2% in their genius level. So the point being that we are killing our genius and our creativity. Somehow it's being stamped out of our students, and as we get older. But so he kind of proposed, George Land proposed there was 2 different types of thinking, the divergent and convergent. And these were really, as a young student or as a young person, you were much more of a divergent thinker. You hadn't yet been given that kind of education system which teaches you to judge, to be more critical, to be more conservative. And you also don't have the experiences. You don't have the experiences and the background, I think, to be able to make more or be more critical in your judgments or your creativity. So a lot of people blame the education system for this, and we base the industrial system and all the rest of it. I think that's part of it, but I think it's just a natural, as we gain more experience, we know a paperclip can't be 3 meters tall. Things like that, I think, play into that. But still, I think what was useful is the kind of differences between divergent and convergent thinking. And for what we try to do, I try to build that curiosity. How do we build curiosity again? How do we develop that creativity, which I think is key for problem-based learning. And for problem-based learning or experiential learning, we really have these multi-solution problems, which are pretty open-ended. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do, open-ended problems. And there's not one right answer. Students need to be creative about these opportunities. They need to be great about the solutions, and the real, I think, what kind of structure we try to provide is room for the students to actually fail. And I think that is probably one of the hardest things to get through. And I don't like to use the word fail. In fact, we never talk about failure. I prefer to say you haven't been successful yet. So we have to allow, or what we try to do is encourage students to try without knowing exactly the certainty of the result, and make sure there's measurements in there to know, and you've got objectives and measurements and criteria you're trying to meet. You haven't been succeeded, how do we change it, how do we improve it, how do we move on? So that's really the basis of experiential and problem-based learning. And this is really difficult for faculty. It's difficult for faculty because on the one hand, and Jamie has kind of already alluded to this, it's really hard to sit down and think up these scenarios. How do we sit down and come up with these creative things in our class that have learning objectives that link to what we're trying to say. And in my experience, this really only happens with groups. You know, conversations you have with people like this, that idea sparks something. That's something I can try. And the internet's a great source for that as well. There's communities online, there's places to get that. There's no real shortcut to that. It's just bouncing things around, and that eventually something that's and Jamie said already, this is so obvious. I mean, I wish I'd thought of something like that. That's really what these kind of groups I think are so good at and helping with. I think the other problem is very unnerving for faculty to not know what the solution is, or the direction is, or the answer is. So for a faculty to actually say, I don't know the answer to that, to a class of students. And there is a balance there. You know, if you go too far on the one side, you completely lose confidence. The students will rate you terribly in my professor, whatever that app is. You know, but there has to be a genuineness. There has to be that kind of develop with students and a authentic, genuine, caring kind of personality, which allows that flexibility, or allows that opportunity for a faculty to say, yes, I don't really know the answer to this, but I'll find it out, and we'll look at it together, we'll learn together, and we'll figure that out. So, and that really kind of hits to what we always say, is that education is not about content. I mean, if it was about content, we would have lost long ago. MIT and all those places that have stuff online, content, you cannot beat what's out there, but it's really about relationships. It's about connecting and making those relationships. So what we try to do, and what we think works, is that and what we tell new faculty coming in is start small. Find one little opportunity that you can integrate with your class. You're going to plan, it takes 15 minutes, but I guarantee it's going to take you 45. And that 45 minutes is going to take you 4 to 5 hours to plan. So it's a lot of work. It takes far more time than everybody ever expects it takes in a class when you're trying to put in some sort of experiential or problem-based learning. But start somewhere, make it small, test it, you know, and measure it. And did it work? What did work? What didn't work? And this was a complete disaster. Let's look for something else, or take the parts that worked and build on those and create them. I think sometimes people look down and say, how can we make my course in a problem-based course? And that's impossible. You just got to start somewhere, put a little bit of thing, become comfortable with it, students become comfortable with it, and then grow it from there. A few of us, I think what we've also found is that the more we do this with students, the more relaxed, or they're more accustomed they come to it. So it becomes easier for students. And we try to do this not only across courses, but across our program. So our new dean is very focused on creating a whole new engineer, kind of based on the book by David Goldberg. And we've started last year with the freshman experience class, and we've built that out and run a pilot. And so this semester we have a 350 student size class. So we scaled it up, and these are going to be through individual and kind of teamwork experiences. We're going to try and introduce this curiosity, connections, and creating values through a combination of applied learning activities, workshops that can teach them, you know, where resources are on campus and how to use a piece of equipment, and all these kind of flexible learning pathways for students, and run by 2 instructors. So we'll see how well they are at the end of next semester, and I'll let you know if it worked or not. And I'm busy now working on the back end, which is the senior capstone design, and we are putting together a pilot this fall for interdisciplinary capstone design, where we are putting together. And I don't like the way that engineers do this. I mean, all engineering schools talk about interdisciplinary projects when they mean just engineers, but we do a little bit more than that. So, but when we're talking about right now interdisciplinary, we're talking about different disciplines within engineering coming together on one team to solve a problem that comes from industry. So we're getting industry-based problems that we're properly scoping, and we're putting together the correct skill set in that team to be able to meet that problem. So that's a pilot we're working with now, and there's also in between parts of it that we're going to be looking at, One of them is very interesting, which kind of Christy said, one of the ideas is kind of an observation, which we probably will look to put in the second or third year, just an observation class that students go out and just spend time observing. So it's not an internship, it's not a co-op, it's just a kind of an observation or assessment type of course. And we're playing with those kind of things now. So currently my courses are all senior design capstones. And these are, I mean, built to be experiential learning. So these are experiential learning classes, and it's not that we have to think about what to do. That's what they are, the experiential learning classes. We typically, or I do, make extensive use of peer review in that process. And that's peer as a class giving feedback to different groups or activities, as well as within teams, feedback on progress and how they're doing, and make a lot of use of rubrics, which we've seen. So extensive use of rubrics that really help to measure the process. So we really look at process measurement and improvement in process, and we don't look at the result. And that's a conflict that I'm continually arguing with the dean about when we engage with industry. So we're taking money from industry to do a specified project. Industry wants the outcome, and I want the learning process. So we have this and kind of dichotomy, and we need to make sure we, for one, articulate up front. So industry is now up front. My focus is on learning outcomes. We may not get the shiny widget that you want at the end. But I tell the students the company needs something out of it, and we use it to push them on. So I don't want to relax it and make it just an easy go. It needs to be something that's really going to be used. The students really need to get the idea this is something critical. The company needs it. They're going to implement and actually use it, and it helps them to engage typically in that. So I think these are, as I said, a lot of this we've done before. I've done a class, well, I'll talk a little bit more about the capstone class later that I've done in the past, but the new class that we try to get together, we hope will be a little bit more able to achieve the results because we have these combined skills or talents within the team. The other part, which is connections, I think, and that's, I'm sure really talked about this already. I think for me, connections, and I see this about both. I see it, connections between students, making connections between completely unrelated concepts. How do we get them to bring these unrelated concepts together for learning or for a solution? And the other one is connections around different viewpoints, for them to realize that theirs is just one perspective, which comes from their experiences and their background, and not just to learn that they need to hear somebody else's perspective, which is going to be different because the experiences have been different, but to realize that actually that's of huge value. That experience actually is going to help me, and ultimately to be, I need that experience. When we get students to the practice, I need you to tell me, I need that experience because it's going to make this richer or going to make it a more viable answer. So those are two different time connections, and I guess that's what they cover, the interconnectivity. So making connections between unrelated concepts is really, I think, comes from sufficient breadth of knowledge. So students have to have some sort of breadth of knowledge, plus a nice deep kind of interest area to get a perfect T. Now we look for T-shaped students. We've got to get them that breadth, so they actually have experience in different areas that are unrelated, and allow opportunities for them to bring those in to connect them. And I think that's best achieved by experience, and that's unfortunately what our students don't have. They're kind of getting that experience, which is why some of these opportunities like internships, co-ops are really great for that. But I think what we try to do, one example I can think of now is we work with a project that the students working on with a Parkinson's Connect, and moving a Parkinson's patient in the morning is very rigid and their joints are not too flexible, and to get them to the edge of the bed is quite a mission, and especially for a caregiver who's typically an elderly person themselves. So get them to the end of the bed. Once they get up and standing, they tend to get a little bit more mobile, and then they can walk. So a simple mechanism to move them across the end of the bed. Students had this great idea of a moving sheet, and they're using a garage door opener, a $100 solution that's got a built-in Alexa that somebody can say stop, go. It's got stop devices, a great solution. And it came from a student who was remodeling his house and had just redone the garage. And so it's how do we create those experiences? How do we give every student the opportunity to remodel a house, to bring that idea into solve? We can't really do it. And so the way I try to achieve that is try and give them opportunities to get that divergent thinking back up, to let them be in certain situations to be completely free with ideas, brainstorming or whatever, different ideas. And there's tools that we use to get them to remove the critical thinking for a moment, bring up creative ideas. One idea spins off another, and eventually crazy ideas are out there, but something eventually might stick. And I have a rule in my class that nobody can say no. It's always yes and I actually have a Nerf gun. So if anybody says no, they get shot. And I think these are kind of ways we can help create almost artificial, in a way, a sense of experiences and allow students to kind of dig up these ideas and try and make connections between them. So making connections between alternative viewpoints is very hard for some students and easier for others. And when we talk about teams, I always start with them to look at introspectively, look at your values, get your mission statement, what are your strengths and weaknesses, then come together as a team. Talk about what your strengths and weaknesses is. Don't rely on Joe doing your presentation when he's a total introvert. That's not going to work. And it's going to stress him out, and it's going to be probably not the best presentation you can do. Look at the strengths and weaknesses and build on them. Build them as a team and understand that they're not the same as you. And I like to use a partnership. I talk about my wife a lot. She'd shoot me probably if she knew. But if we went into our relationship and said, you're great, but if you could just change these few things, that would be perfect. I don't think it would last very long. I mean, we've got to look at the strengths and know that, and not from our perspective, but from the strengths from their perspectives. And students sometimes get that, but they don't all get that. The teams that kind of get that and start to draw on those strengths fly, and they're the storming, forming, and they're the team that just go up there. But some of them don't, and as much as we try, they just don't. We do what I do in my classes. I do make them form companies. So for the senior design, they actually not a team anymore. They become a company. They got to have a company name, a company logo, mission statement. They do a company charter, and we actually have board meetings. And we'll have board meetings on a few occasions throughout the 2 semesters, and we fire people. And that'll be a kind of normal HR process. There'll be a problem brought up. There'll be a mitigation process kind of put together for 2 weeks. And if that's not met, then the person's fired. Because that just has to happen. Sometimes things don't work. And I think doing those things also helps to kind of raise the level and get students aware that this is important for them to kind of work and to connect. I have been teaching capstone or senior design for quite some time, both in the biomedical and in my current position. And we have been teaching every year. We've been teaching it as a combined class with the entrepreneurship students. So that to me is more interdisciplinary than 3 different engineers. So we work with the business students, and they bring in kind of their viewpoints, and it's funny in the beginning. Students always get together when they meet in a team, and I'll hear engineers saying, "Gee, these business students know nothing." And the business students saying, "Gee, these engineers know nothing." But again, it's those teams that realize the strengths and weaknesses that gel and that really worked. We did try it one year with journalist students, and I wanted to bring them in. And we've got this bunch of engineers who can hardly put a sentence together, and we've got these other group of students who are really articulate and can write press releases and their pitches and do all the great things that these students need to be successful. And we really have problems with both of them finding value. What's my value? And these poor journalist students thinking that they were so inferior to these people making these big widgets that could open and close and shut and lights go on. And the way we got around that one in the end was to actually monetize it. So we said to the engineering groups, we'd say, right, to write these 3 things would take you 10 hours at $10 an hour. That's $100. Are you willing to pay $100 for that? And they were like, yes. We go to the journalist students and say, would you do these things for $100? And they'd say, yes. So we kind of used money as the exchange or as the mediator, but for them to appreciate the value. I would have liked to continue with that, but I think, as Jamie mentioned, the hard part around co-teaching environments is the scheduling and who gets the credits or how those credits engage with that class. We were able to do as an extracurricular for those journal students, which is why they were able to. They didn't get the money. The money went to the newspaper that they worked with, and so the newspaper, the campus newspaper, got the money. But those kind of logistic administration issues are really what holds that up. So with Chris and I, Chris Broberg, who's the infernal instructor, it takes a lot of time, and we will meet several times before the semester, putting our schedules together, overlapping our schedules. We will meet at least every week prior to the class to make sure that what went to, what was covered last week and to cover what we're doing this week. So it does take extra time. So co-teaching definitely takes a bit of extra time and extra work. And we've also kind of found that there are areas where we look for the overlaps. We look for the places that overlap, that fit, the learning objectives that fit, so we can do the same content, we can do the same assessments, but we also make sure we don't want to do the classes completely together, because we lose that individuality or the requirements that are different for the different classes. So we've been very careful in making sure that we keep the individual requirements separated. So we look for the overlap, which is common, that's easy to do, but we make sure that there are some discipline specific kind of areas that are kept separated. But the only reason we can do that, because he's an associate dean and I'm kind of a chair, so I don't have a teaching load, and we don't have that administration being counter that's saying, right, who gets this credit? I'm not going to give you workload credit for both of you, and who we're going to pay for this, and classroom sizes, because it shrinks and grows, and there's all those sort of real scheduling, and all those sort of things become real complicated and tend to stop that being effective. But again, connecting the right people, getting the right people together, I think co-op or co-taught environment is probably the best way to go. The one college or school that I think is doing that very well is Olin, but very narrow school, engineering only, tons of money, pick of the crop students. It's very hard to replicate what they've got, but their kind of co-teaching environment, I think, is very good. So probably the most important part for me, or the strong emphasis I like to add, and I said it probably a few times already, is the value component, is creating value. So any project idea or any activity that is done, whether it's by faculty or by students, if it doesn't have some sort of value, it's not going to be sustainable. It'll be a one-off and it'll die, or it's just not going to continue. And I think most times we look at money as that value, but we know that value is much broader than just money, and it's far more complex than that. But it's really important that we look at what the value component is, what we're measuring as value, if it's money, if it's time, if it's sustainability, if it's a waste or whatever it is, health, whatever our value is. The students need to understand what that is, and need to ensure that that is the kind of guiding factor when they're looking at developing or when they're doing their project or solution. So we try this and bring this in right from the beginning, from our freshman level, and we introduce some elements of value, sort of like what's what's your customer really want? Dig into the question, the 5 whys, ask, find out really, if I say I want this, just find out what the reason is, dig down, find what's really driving it, what's the value. It's kind of those, look for those solutions that are must have and not the I'd like to have type of solutions. So, and we bring in the idea of costs, material, time. Students have to understand that these are all part of valuable solutions. So they need to, and as I said, we do it in various stages. We bring it in freshman year, and that's the thing we've really found. The more we do this, the same as rubrics, the more we introduce them. At the beginning, when you put out rubrics, everybody gets 10, and they're absolutely a waste of time. And then students start to get useful feedback from another group that actually helps them, and they start to appreciate the value of rubrics and the peer assessments, and they start giving better reviews, and it gets better. And if we do it from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, they're so used to it by then, and they know the impact, or they know the value of it, that they are more likely for that tool to be useful. So, and the same with this, we kind of ingrain this. We do it from freshmen, and we do it spottily in between, and then we do it at the end as well in senior design. So creating startups is certainly part of this idea. That's what the entrepreneurial probably component is, but that's really not the focus. I think what I'm hoping to achieve is creating skill sets that help students to be more impactful employees. My experience is that startups really take a huge amount of time and resources, and to get, those are sort of things that our graduates don't have. Our graduates that come out of school don't have really a whole lot of resources. So I think Jamie mentioned we've had, since I've been here, we've had 2 projects that have moved into companies, and they are completely different. They are nowhere near what the original thinking or idea was. The kind of fundamental problem is being tackled in a completely different way. New set of people, it's completely changed. There's, none of the original students are involved in that. I mean, that's just how it works with the startup. So it's really not what the focus is, I think, because that wouldn't serve our students, because most of them go into employment. But I think it is something that we talk about, and we make it there, and give them skill sets for them to be able to achieve that. We're also looking at ways to create more value with students and Jamie mentioned this, creating flexible learning pathways by breaking our kind of fixed tracks and programs into these stackable certificates. So take our track, put them into 3 or 4 classes that kind of fit into a kind of nice little container, and hopefully that is aligned to some sort of industrial certification. Easier perhaps for us, but the closer we can get that to industrial certification, the more impact it will have on the student. So basically my philosophy is to create these multiple entry, multiple exit points for students. So student can easily pause their tuition. They can get so far and get a certificate that allows them then to get a meaningful job. But they do have the opportunity to come back to continue that by stacking on further a certificate. So our motto is certificates create job opportunities for you, but a degree gives you a career pathway. So we try to make sure that they understand that if you want a long kind of runway for your career, you really do need that degree. We have had some issues with this, and it's not probably due to its complexity. And it's funny, it's not from the students as much, or certainly not the incoming students. So the students and parents that come, when I talk about this, everybody embraces it. Everyone sees it makes logic. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I think it's a great idea. So there's a lot of acceptance by parents and students. We do have some students though that just don't like choice, and so we bundle these certificates back into the traditional tracks and say, okay, you can do that track, but you're doing these 4 certificates, and that they feel more comfortable with that because they don't want to have too much choice. But the real issue or the complexity really impacts the administration and the advising. So you can imagine a poor advisor pulling her hair out as she's trying to put plans together for students who don't know what certificates they want to do, going to be changing certificates. There's almost in number of options of career pathway or degree pathways, at least for these students. So it's an advising nightmare. It's an administration nightmare because we've got this computer system that checks the boxes, and now we have people doing random or a selection of certificates, and they're not going to know if this is done and that's done. Is this going to be a degree yet? It's not a degree. So the administration system's kind of clanky and causes issues that we're always going in with tape and sellotape to kind of fix it up. So we have had problems with the idea, but I think we are getting through those, kind of patching the holes. Our real problem that we're still challenging and working on now is the really articulation agreements with 2+2 colleges. So that's really hard, that you have somebody coming into a structure that's no longer, there's no real defined 2+2. It's now pretty open-ended. And that really takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of conversations, meetings, and coordinations with us and the advisors and the advisors from the other schools. So I think, I mean, hopefully these things are all possible. There are certain kind of roadblocks that you're going to hit, but the main thing that I mentioned to faculties is it's going to take a lot of time. All of these different ideas that we're trying to put in do take a lot of effort, and if that is happening, what is the reward? What is the gain? What is the reward, or what are they getting out of it? What's their value out of it? And of course, better teaching, better students outcome, but there also has to be some other rewards. Course release, when somebody's doing so much work on putting together a freshman class, I've really got to do something to allow them that opportunity to do it. Course release, overload. An occasion, it's not something I like to do on a regular basis, because people get burnt out, and it's really more protecting. And I spend most of my time as administrator protecting my faculty who want to do this, who are really engaged in it, and trying to protect them from outside, from the dean, and making sure that they get the opportunity to be as effective as they are. So I really didn't mean to spend a whole lot of time, and I spent a lot more than I intended to, and I didn't want to have a whole lot of slides, so I minimized my slides and I still end up speaking too much. So I really wanted this to be more of an opportunity to be kind of a sit down fireside chat, and for you to ask me questions, or for me to learn from you. So I do apologize, it kind of took longer than I thought, but thank you for listening. Hopefully I gave you some ideas of things we're doing, and things that we are trying, and happy to answer any questions you have or continue the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like I even maybe undersold you a little bit. There's a tremendous amount of information in that presentation, and I took a lot of notes, and I'll have a lot of things to think about. And we don't have a ton of time, and that's fine. But I would like to create some space for questions and comments and a little bit of discussion, because I think there's so much to talk about there. So who would like to get us started?
Gary, I love so much of what you shared, and I aspire to do part of what you've been working on there. So thank you. One of the things I really love is your stress on process. And that's something I'd like to get better at. Could you tell me a couple of things as you unfolded this that struck me as their key parts of this? One was peer evaluation, having students kind of give feedback. I'm assuming they're working in teams and they're having an opportunity to say somebody's really sucking eggs and not doing their part of it, right? I'm interested in kind of like a couple of stories or examples within the time we have, just to illustrate how that peer feedback, maybe leading to disciplinary action, firing a student, and then how you, that's one question. And then the related one is how you grade process.
So I think the team performance, we do have rubrics for those, and we try and make them, we say that they are anonymous, so that's not shared. we do those, and we actually did it for a number of years for a study we were doing, and I don't find those, funny enough, that effective. What's worked the best is getting people in a conversation. So putting them all together and saying, right, what's not working? And I would have had reports from students all the way. They all come to me one by one and say, Joe's not doing his work and Mary's really messing out on me. But when we put them in the group and make each person say, I'll point to each person, okay, what are you doing? What value are you adding? Where are you not contributing? What can you do better? And each individual having the backstory already, might help me kind of pick on different people. But those board meetings have become a critical component for functional teams for me. And we used to do them once a semester. We're now doing them 2 or 3 times a semester to give us the opportunity. And yeah, we haven't had many, but we have had few occasions where student is not able to perform. They're given some sort of criteria. Please, everyone agrees. The students in the meeting, everyone's together, agrees. I'll do this. I'll get this done. I'll do it by this date. It's not done. There's one more opportunity, and then that student's on their own to do a project.
Yep.
They come out of the team, and in both cases that it's happened in the time I've been here, that students has withdrawn from the class.
Yeah.
And taken again, and actually, the one in particular student, I can tell you that withdrew, was fired from the team, and I think had concerns, and that we weren't aware of. I mean, we don't ask people to reveal all personal issues at the time, and obviously we try and encourage it, but we don't always hear all the details. Came back the next year, formed a different team, different group of people. And in fact, that team that just gelled, and that team actually won a prize in the Engineering Open House. So it was
great.
It was successful, but that doesn't always happen. I mean, that was one incident.
Sure.
And I think it took a mother, actually. A mother from overseas, visiting student, came over and asked why wasn't Johnny graduating, and I had to reveal the backstory, and she kind of sorted it out. So
Yeah.
Mother fixed him. So good. And the other question was, sorry, what was that? It was
How do you evaluate process?
process is just, I mean, it's really through our rubrics. So we've got I've got a great group of faculty to work with, and I'm saying it sounds like it's me doing all this. It's really honestly the faculty that together was put this together. And my right hand person, Akara, who is our coordinator, she's very much of a process person. If it wasn't for her, it would be, I'm just all over the show. Go out, jump, let's go in the deep end, and she's very much of the process and the measurement person that kind of, she's my kind of person I bounce everything off. So yeah, it's a teamwork effort. Some people are really good at putting these rubrics together that are clever and have ways of measuring students' thoughts and processes and their mindset, rather than the typical engineering approach is a 5 or 7, Yeah. So I have, and we do go a lot with, we had a great, Dave Bernstein is no longer here, but we've got some great people in social work who help us put together surveys, especially when we try and look for dynamics and team dynamics and things like that. But the process is really just, some of it is as simple as, have you followed steps 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
4? And measuring, have you done that? Have you not done that? But there's other parts of it which need cleverer people than me to ask the right questions. And it's a team of us that get together.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you.
It might be great if we would be able to see some of those rubrics. I would love to see an example of how that works, if that would be possible.
Yeah, I'll pick out some rubrics from the certainly from my class. I'll see if I can pick a couple from other places as well. Happy to share those.
That's great.
And to get feedback, because they're not perfect.
Well, and I was going to say, I really like this very intentional idea about reflection and peer review. I have a couple of classes of my own that I do, and I really sort of take that, I would call it a writing workshop approach, where I have the students review other people's work, individual work, not group work, and then try to help them develop a final product that's a little better, right? But if they had started that in their freshman year and carried that same process through to their senior level, you're absolutely right. They would value the input of their colleagues more, and they would spend more time crafting their own evaluations, which, as we all know who are sitting here, you learn so much more, especially when you're a first year, a second year, third year teacher. You learn so much more from grading your students' work than you ever think you're going to learn, especially in basic skills and basic understanding. So I really like that idea of starting them off early on peer review and then continuing that process through. That's really impressive.
Yeah, I kind of skipped over that point, but for engineers, reflection is a bad word. So I can't really go to a group of engineers and say, let's do a reflective essay or whatever. That just ain't going to work. But we can talk about closing the loop, feedback, reviews. We can make it more like that. And yeah, in the beginning, it's terrible. You get 2 lines. It's just the more you keep at it, the more you keep doing it. But that actually, and I didn't say this, but the review is the most critical part. That reflection is the most critical learning. That's where students get their learning. Yeah. With an applied learning exercise or PBL or project-based learning. It's that reflection piece that really enforces the learning. And what I mentioned with the first university where I did that internship, having a reflection at the very end was something that didn't work. Well, it did work, but it was not effective enough. I think we need to have more, we need to have reflections right after incidents and have a number of them, make them smaller. And then I think it was Christie's example of doing the kind of the journal reviews. We've got the tools to do this now, make them journal, and then use it at the very end for a reflection paper. And not leaving it all at the very end, because that's what we used to do. We just say at the very end, now write your paper, and you kind of forgot what you did 2 weeks ago. But the reflection is key, and it's not easy for me, and it's not easy for engineers. I can tell you that.
I'll just dive in for one more thing. I just really wanted to, for my purposes, I really like a lot of your process, and I like this idea of project-based learning, that students need a sense of ownership in this project. They need a sense of urgency, right? That we've got a job to do. We've got to get it done. And I really like in the process here that you're talking about, well, using, and Rachel can speak to this, using improv tools, right? You don't ever say no, you say yes and. So that classic improv theater performance approach, I think that's really cool, getting us into our connections here between disciplines. And I really am sort of impressed with this idea of, we always say think outside the box, but what we really mean is leave that linear thought, leave that critical thinking thought aside, and let's just engage in creativity, which Jamie is like, Cheryl, put creativity in there. Let's engage in something. What if, time was reversed? What if we had all the money in the world? I love the idea of using a garage door opener to help a Parkinson's patient limber up. That's amazing. So that's fantastic. And then also in your processes, that I always hated group work when I was a kid in college. I hated group work because I'm your partner, your administrative partner. I like things, I like process, I like to get things done, I like to check things off my list. And sometimes the group's not working at the same pace that I am, or they're not valuing the things I'm valuing. So I love this idea of the board meeting and getting people together and evaluating, because there are always students in group work who tend to do more work, and they're very upset that others aren't pulling their weight. And the folks who aren't pulling their weight, other people besides the people in the group need to know that, right? And so that will probably kick them in the butt a little bit if we're having these board meetings. I think that's really terrific. I like that idea. I'm thinking about the things that we could apply to our own processes that you're talking about. And those are the things I really like, that sense of urgency, that sense of ownership. We're a group, the group succeeds or the group fails. Let's go. And that whole yes and creativity. I really was struck by all that. So thank you.
We say here that our teams are typically one driver, one passenger, and two flat wheels. So that's a normal structure of a team. And I think the problem is the teams that don't function is that they're getting the people to do the horrible jobs, and they're just not good at it, you know. And the strong personalities often dictate, and they're just getting people to do things that they're just not good at. So you're not going to get much out of them if you're going to do that. So.
And that is such a terrific human resources lesson to learn. Yeah.
So I've been kind of experimenting with the group work because I like what Cheryl said. I was like, I always hated group projects, but life is a group project. And so one of the things that I started doing this semester was I have, you know, especially in some of my upper level classes, embedded a group activity that has a project, right? So like in criminal law, they had to get to a trial. So I had defense attorneys and prosecution attorneys, and they were really pissed about how the different groups were working and everything. And I told them, consider me human resources. And if you come to me with your complaint, you're not going to like what happens because I'm going to start messing with your job. Oh my goodness. I fired a student and they were just like, what? I was like, well, if you come to me, if y'all can't resolve your problem within your group, people get fired, they lose their job. And they were just like, whoa, this is so draconian. And it ended up with conflict meeting because they did their own little mediation. They kind of went into their own world. And I kept telling them, this is the whole you don't want mom involved problem. Like, solve your problems at work, solve your conflict. Anyway, what I'm getting at is what I like what you were talking about, Gary, is teaching them to resolve conflict, because you're going to go to work and you're going to have conflict with your colleagues. And it's that whole 80-20% problem, you know, where 20% is doing 80% of the, you always have your over functioners and your people that do all the work, and then they get resentful and pissy about it. And you got to work with these people. So I think, I mean, I've had the luxury with my upper level classes of doing that. But what I'm getting excited about today is thinking about doing that more at the ground level, like in my general education classes. And then it's obviously part of this project that we're putting together where we have the classes interacting. I'm almost thinking, Jamie, something we'll probably get to next, but like with our classes interacting with each other, conflict resolution is huge in life. And if you can't learn how to tell somebody what the problem is and figure it out, you're screwed. No one's going to want to hire you. So I'm seeing that potential for, I love the board idea, right? So when our classes are interacting with each other, we have like, okay, you will have board meetings and you're working together and you will come together and look at each other and have conversations. I love that idea.
And that's also something that's so clearly a skill that gets better with repetition. So like with using the rubrics and the peer evaluation, you know, if we can start that early and then iterate it, it will improve. Any other thoughts or responses? I'm sure there
I
are.
like the culture of failure in a way. Now I understand you don't want to use the word failure because you're talking about divergent thinking, but that's been interesting for me. Just real quick anecdote. I had my stepdaughter once when she was very young was going through this little Spanish program thing and just flying along and really pleased with herself. And then she started missing some of the things. And I just watched her enthusiasm fall. And I just spoke to her briefly. I said, well, you know, if you're not failing, you're not learning anything. You know, if you can do everything, you're not learning anything. And it boosted her motivation to keep going a little bit longer. And I was just going to share an experience that in my therapy training, it's very difficult for me to fail when we're doing role plays and things like that, because I think as academics, we get where we are because we're really good at not failing. And so it's hard to put yourself out there in front of peers and to maybe not do super well, not do 100% or something like that. So as a learner, that's been interesting for me to try to value failing. If I really want to get better and get that feedback, you know, I need to see failure as, just like I was telling my stepdaughter, that's how you learn. And then as a therapist, one of the positions I have is that I need to fail as fast as possible with the client. Because let's say somebody comes to me with social anxiety And I may have in my head a dozen ideas of things they could do to address that social anxiety, right? But they're not all going to work for her. And so the faster I can fail and find out the things that don't work, the faster I'm going to be able to get to the things that work for her, which may not be what worked for the very last client I had with social anxiety or whatever, right? So I really valued what you said, because this has been, even though I've kind of known this intellectually, I've sort of moved into this more experientially, this idea of embracing failure. And at the same time, I really like what you said, because you're coming from a divergent thinking approach, so you don't even want that word. So, there's pros and cons to using the word failure. But I love the idea, because I think a one right answer kind of teacher can create one right answer kind of students. And I love the idea of trying to cultivate a divergent thinking approach. Sometimes it's easier to do in some fields than it is others, because, some fields it's like, well, I mean, even in engineering, that value is either correct within a certain tolerance or it's not, but, and, either Freud said this or he didn't, so there is that one right answer aspect. But it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to create an entire university that embraced failure and divergence, where people just weren't afraid to put themselves out there like that.
I agree, and I want to follow up on that. I underlined and was thinking about that idea of failure as the means towards success, whether we use that word or not. But I was curious as to whether or how we need to distinguish between failure of outcome and failure of process. Because you could have a really good process, but just not get the desired outcome. And that's great, right? I mean, you're doing the right process, you're going to get there eventually. But if there's a failure of process, I mean, that could be due to a lot of things. It could be due to a lack of effort, a lack of having the proper understanding. But a process that isn't working, that's not something where you can just say, oh, well, we'll try again and it'll get better necessarily. So do you kind of address that, or how can you kind of steer people towards the right process? Because that's what you're evaluating primarily. Do you focus on failure of process, or is it more with the outcomes that you identify failure and then you say, well, go back and try again?
So, yeah, I mean, they typically, with any project, you're going to come up with a set of criteria. Those criteria will be, we work on customer criteria, engineering characteristics, these all sorts of criteria that need to be met. So they've got to meet those criteria, and there's various different ways to do it, or how well they can meet them. But it's the fact that they've looked at those different, and they've had opportunities to collect effectively a customer criteria. Might be wrong or right, but they've gone through that process. They've had a process of evaluating different ideas. And it wasn't just because I like the color pink. There was a proper structure and a process that they followed. So we measured that process. And I don't really mind what they come out at the end. I can see perhaps that this is by far the worst solution you could have picked. But if they followed that process and gone through it, they're credited for that. So, and the more modular you make it, the more defined, smaller steps, the easier it is to measure as well. Measure the different process. And I mean, engineering is pretty process driven. So we've got processes down taped, and there's 1,000 books on different processes, engineering design process, and the waterfall model, and there's kind of all these processes that are out there. So we kind of borrow and mix and match some of those to fit what we want. So engineers like process, so that's not a hard part for us to look for and to implement kind of process. But that's what we look for when we measure. Have you gone through? Have you followed this process? Did you do the house of quality and put the things right? Not that your outcome is wrong because you put the wrong emphasis or you put the wrong weight on this, or that's not so much of a concern. It's more that they've followed that through. And generally those can be corrected anyway. So they're following the process. And if they do get something wrong, it's easy enough to come back to them and say, oh, have you thought about it? And they often do it themselves anyway. They're self-regulating, and they kind of sort it out themselves, especially with a kind of peer review environment. Students are harsh, much harsher than I could ever be. So those kind of peer review environments are often where a lot of that is brought to their attention, that they've followed a process, but they've done something wrong.
Yeah, that is helpful. So it's really hinges on defining your process very carefully so that you can get a clear evaluation of that. I don't want to shut things down too much. It's 11:15. If there's maybe one more comment or question, we could do that. But then I think we probably need to take our break.
I wonder, as we're talking about process, Jamie, if part of the, and Gary confirmed this for me or deny it, in engineering, so many of your processes, I mean, even waterfall process maybe, but most of your processes are iterative in nature. And so when they're working towards an outcome, there's this constant small work cycle with development and redefinement, like in agile or lean or other, methodologies. And so because it's not working linear towards one outcome, they have lots of opportunities to refine that process as they go along. And I wonder if in the humanities, that's something that we're struggling with, is that we don't see a start point or we see a start point and end point, whereas they see these constant cycles of getting to the end point. And that's where maybe we struggle in the humanities with adopting those more agile or lean or more iterative processes in our thinking. And that's why measuring process is hard for us, is because we think it's point A to point B, and it's not, it's like a wiggly line.
Yeah, very much. And that's fairly new for engineering. I mean, that's in the last 50 years, that kind of iterative, and that's kind of the way we approach developing problem-based learning. It's that kind of iterative approach. Do something small, tweak it, change it, see if it works, test it, bring it back, change and revise it. Don't try and do the whole course at once. So yeah, I mean, for engineering, it's pretty easy. I wouldn't have a clue how to do it in philosophy or history. I'm sure you guys would have a better way, but it's not my, I have a clue how to do it for that.
Yeah. My biggest challenge on that in this conversation and thinking about, it's iterative and you're trying to get to a successful point, is that for a freshman humanities course, I have a certain set of expectations, but for a junior level, say his humanities course, the expectations are higher. So achieving a certain level of proficiency at one level when they're just introduced, yet we want them to then make that next project so much more sophisticated, so much more aware of the nuances surrounding cause and effect, right? That it's really hard to think of a good rubric and a good kind of iterative process that creates more and more sophistication. That's kind of the holy grail in my world of assessment and iterative. So anyway, great question.
A lot to think about there. Go ahead.
Sorry, I know we're short on time. I just wanted to echo that, Cheryl, the same issue holds in our courses as we progress up to higher levels in biology. There is a lot of nuance and there's a lot of application and, maybes, but at the lower levels, they really need just the core skills. And yet when we get to junior and senior levels, I'm asking them to apply it to situations they've never seen before. And, they're scared of that failure and they're scared of the nuance. They want concrete. And I struggle a lot with figuring out a way to integrate some of that more flexible thinking and evaluating that at lower levels when they also need to know these core things. But I feel like it's essential because my students don't see the value of that kind of nuanced thinking and that flexible thinking and the application and really just thinking about a process as much as they might had they been introduced to it earlier. And they're just simply not as comfortable with it either.
I'm so happy that historians and biologists have the same problem. Makes me very happy. Maybe we can figure it out.
So the dean's kind of thinking of this was to take out a set of classes. So the freshman experience is one, senior capstone is always there. That one's an easy one to do. But put in a set of classes where we can focus on that doesn't have the content, doesn't have the biology specific or the aerospace or the mechanical engineering. Those are still done in the way they do them, but we're putting through a track of courses that will help teach some of these concepts. It kind of makes sense. Because I can't go into mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering. I mean, you certainly don't want an aerospace engineer to be comfortable with failure, because that's a plane I don't want to get into. So, I mean, they have to have their discipline specific kind of areas. But those techniques, we're hoping we can introduce them through a series of courses that are common that the students will be doing. Which I think is kind of what you're trying to do.
Right. I think the issue for us is that, you know, we don't really necessarily have the flexibility within our courses within our scheduling for our students. They're pretty overloaded right now. I mean, their courses are set, and that would require us to really create something new for that to make it an easier kind of delineation where they learn these skills in a separate location where it's more an add-on of skills rather than trying to integrate it, which is what I feel like is the only thing we currently have time for in our schedule as it is for our students. But
there are a lot of logistical and resource limitations that we are dealing with here. That's for sure. Well, I'd like to ask that we take a break now. My clock just switched to 11:22. So why don't we try to get back at 11:35? Sound good? We have a lot of things to cover, but I think everybody who's talking after the break is planning to be very brief, and then we'll have a little chance for feedback on what we've come up with so far. So take a break, refill your coffee, go outside, whatever, and we'll see you back in a little more than 10 minutes.
Thanks for the email, David. And Jamie, I went ahead and posted yesterday's slides also to the module.
Okay, great. Great. Appreciate that. Yeah, we'll try to get caught up. I'll post my slides as well, and we'll try to get as much of this as we can preserved for posterity and for NEH hypothetical review purposes.
But also just to use it maybe. If that's helpful. Well, it's been a really great day today. People have really just chimed in. Sorry, I'm right on 11:35. I'll wait just a few more minutes.
I was just trying to read Greg's comment in the chat here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great comment. And David, I think you kind of summed it up, concisely there with the reference to jazz. For me, it's the Grateful Dead. I listen to the Grateful Dead quite a lot, and they are well known as an improvisational band, and every live performance is different. So
you look at Picasso even and all this abstract stuff, but if you look at some of his early work, he was a master of the fundamentals and just being able to take a line and really.
Yeah, a lot of those
it kind
guys,
of blows me away.
Kandinsky and people like that. Absolutely.
Study and imitate the greats first before you start innovating.
There you go.
All right, well, it is 11:36. We want to respect everyone's time as always and get out of here by 12:30-ish. And so I think it falls to me to kind of get us started. Let me get the thing that I want to share. I'm just going to say a few words briefly about kind of the program overview. This is a visual that I came up with really quickly, real quick and dirty kind of thing. I can probably make that larger.
Yeah, you should.
This was for an NEH grant recipients workshop we had earlier in the summer, and they asked program directors to provide a single slide encapsulating their project if they wanted to. And so I kind of realized the day before this was going to happen that we didn't have anything. And so I threw this together. So it's not anything to make too much of, but I think it kind of helps to visualize and bring everything together. So, the idea for this project initially had to do with trying to figure out how we can make connections between the humanities and other programs. And there are different ways of conceptualizing that. We wanted to really reach out towards the pre-professional and the scientific programs outside the humanities. A lot of certificate programs are maybe interdisciplinary, but they're sort of self-contained. And so the idea is to attract students to come and complete the certificate as something that supplements their primary discipline. We wanted not to so much try to bring students to this certificate, but find a way to kind of meet them halfway and bring the humanities into their programs so that they could encounter some of these skills and competencies on their own home turf, if you will, right? In their own neighborhood. I won't get into this, but I was thinking the other day about the university as sort of like a city, and different disciplines as sort of like neighborhoods. And what we're doing here is trying to throw kind of a street party where everybody brings food from their own neighborhood and we get to sample. But that's a metaphor for another occasion. But so you can see here, the humanities core is intersecting the different disciplines or tracks, as I think we're calling them right now, that we are wanting to develop. So we will, in fact, develop as many as 6, or perhaps down the road even more, 6 different certificates 6 different tracks by which this ETHV certificate could be obtained. And this space of overlap is where our program really happens. And so on the left, the key elements, this would be an undergraduate program and a certificate program, which we can talk about what that means later and maybe why it should be a certificate or shouldn't be a certificate program as opposed to, say, a minor, which was a question that our VP for Academic Affairs asked. 17 credits is what it adds up to, and it has kind of these characteristics that we've already been talking about, being interdisciplinary and collaborative and integrative and experiential and so on. The structure that we have come up with, and everything we're going to say over the next hour, is subject to revision, improvement, change. We really are, as much as we have worked on this a fair bit, we are very keenly aware that there's plenty of room for improvement, both before we launch these things, but also, of course, with this idea of closing the circle and figuring out after trying something and perhaps in some way failing, trying again. But the structure we've come up with so far has 4 tiers. At the beginning, there would be 2 intro courses, both of which would be revised to reflect the content of the certificate, to focus on issues of technology and human values, to some degree. At tier 2, we would have 2 intermediate level courses, and these would be linked via a shared curricular module, an integrative module, and then supplemented with a service learning component or some sort of experiential or integrative additional credit hour. And David will talk about that. I'll talk about the shared module. Tier 3 would be an interdisciplinary capstone course. We, of course, already have capstone courses. We would take 1 or 2 of these and really modify them in a way that reflects the program that we're developing. And this would be a place where we hope to directly involve members of our community advisory board. Gary was talking about industry provided problems that students in their capstone course work on. We would be aspiring to do something similar to that by inviting a community advisory board member to challenge our students with a real world problem from their field, from their industry. And then students would engage in finding potential solutions to that problem. And that would be a major element in this NSP capstone course. And then the 4th tier is we wanted to have one more chance for students to do something experiential, something that would really bring things together. So it could be an internship. Some of our partner disciplines already have internships set up or know how to do those things very well. Other disciplines might work better with some kind of faculty guided research project. We could also develop service. So that is sort of a best fit situation there, but we wanted to have a 1 credit culminating experience that would bring this together. And all of these elements are guided towards this central question of helping students understand how new and emerging technologies will transform their field or discipline, and how can we ensure that these changes uphold human values. So that is kind of the big picture. Now we're going to talk about the first 2 tiers, which are the ones that we have worked out the most, in which we are going to be piloting. To some extent, we've already piloted them, but we're going to be kind of rolling them out in the coming academic year. And if there are any questions about that, go ahead. But Cheryl is going to take over now to talk a little bit about tier 1. So anything unclear about that at all, or that you want to ask quickly?
Just following up on what was said earlier, how do the credit hours fit into a program? Is it part of their GE or general education criteria?
So the certificate would be made up of some courses drawn from our general education program, and some courses that would be required for the home discipline. So all of the courses the students would be taking, with the exception of there are 2 1-credit supplemental courses. All of the other courses would be courses they would be taking anyway. So those courses would be revised or tweaked to suit the needs of the program.
At a time when our enrollment strategy includes targeting more non-traditional and transfer students, how is this, or is this going to work for transfer students and students who are transferring in a large number of credits who might not meet the transferred credit, you know, the non-traditional?
So I think transfer credits can, I mean, they pose a certain challenge, but at tier 1, I think we would accept transfer courses.
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and go through the printed version of this? I just sent it to
that's a good
everybody's
idea.
email. I'm screen sharing it now, but I just sent it to everybody's email because I find sometimes when someone's screen sharing a Word document, it's kind of a pain. So feel free to open up your Word document if you prefer. I send it to your emails. But yeah, as Jamie said, and these are excellent questions, both are right to I hope I can answer right this second. As Jamie said, we're envisioning 6 tracks for this certificate or this experience, this emphasis, this minor, whatever it turns out to be. And it's a 17-hour program based on a flexible curricular template that integrates 9 hours from the general education program, Gary. So 9 hours, and this would be a general education intro level course in, say, history or English. We have history here exampled today. An ethics course, which for us is a junior level course, and a mid-tier level general education course. And then a capstone course, which is a capstone actually in our gen ed, right? So 9 of these 17 hours are actually in the general education program. The other 9 would be courses that are required of the major, so that students would be taking in the major anyway, right? And would be intentionally integrative, which is a term I'm not sure what I think about. We did talk about on this first tier, and that's what I've been tasked to talk to you about on this first tier. I suggested to everybody, even though I'm one of those people who sort of lives and dies by our general education program, because we teach so much in the gen ed in history. But I do believe our university policies are such, right, that we can transfer in history classes, English classes. We can transfer in those 2+2s that Gary was talking about on articulation agreements. So we do indeed have to acknowledge that people have already taken their history class, they've already taken their English class, and it won't be an ETHV intensive, so they're going to miss out a little bit, but we're going to have to accept that they can indeed transfer those in. We can talk about that, and if that really detracts from that sort of iterative growing process. But in the best of all possible worlds, they would take a general education course at that sort of freshman level that is has been redesigned, has been noted as an ETHV version of their history class or their English class or some other humanities class, right? And that in that class itself, that humanities class has been sort of refined, re-engineered, rethought about. It does indeed have to still meet those, those basic components of what we hope a student will get out of that gen ed class, but it will have a particular focus. And in things like history and English, I keep using those examples. This is a very easy thing to do. You just drive your content and your analysis towards that particular topic. The goal is that this class would also be taken in addition to, say, your intro level class or one of the intro level classes in biology, psychology, business data analytics, criminal justice, such that the faculty in those 2 independent courses would get together, as Gary was discussing, and intentionally think about how history and the study of criminal justice might actually work well together. And what are some projects that we could do in common, right? So the hope is that it'll be interdisciplinary, looking at a problem from two perspectives. It'll be integrative in that we're integrating content, we're integrating activities, project-based, collaborative, good old-fashioned group work, and connections to real-world challenges, or at least I almost took that out, connections to real-world challenges, at least thinking about that, right? Thinking about how these connections might be. So the example I have for you, and then I'll be handing off to David in a second, the example, or Jamie, the example I have for you is World Civ 1. So we've revised this course to include an emphasis on the history of writing and mathematical reckoning. So thinking about writing and math as technology, right? So we'll do some readings on that, and we'll do some lectures and discussions on that. But then we'll also engage in some integrative research methods and think about issues like, Christy and I have already talked about this, like literacy and law, right? What is the connection between having the technology of writing and then having access to justice, right? We'll also think about things like ancient code breaking. I'll have students and devise their own probably substitution ciphers that we know came from, that were prevalent in the ancient world. We'll also get them to think about frequency analysis because it was medieval Muslim scholars who developed a process of frequency analysis that essentially put substitution ciphers to bed. Darn it. So as soon as we had a good code system, especially for military and diplomatic reasons, here comes a group, sort of a think tank in Baghdad who goes, oh, we can crack that. We can't speak Italian, but we can crack that. So that's really going to be kind of fun. So thinking about substitution ciphers and then also thinking about frequency analysis, right? We'll also, this is one of my favorites for the creative people. We're going to do some ink and accounting. I'm going to actually bring in materials and they're going to sit in groups and they're going to craft a quipu. Where the quipu, you may know, was kind of a macrame approach to keeping track of inventory, but also for storytelling. So I'm going to have them as a group come in and do their own quipu that relates to some actual event in Incan history, and they're going to have to perform it for the class. So we'll see how that goes. That may be a total flop. But those kinds of projects where we're asking them to take the content knowledge that they're going to have and then try to put themselves in that position, right? Try to put themselves in those time periods and come up with creative ways to address some of the problems that folks had in the day. This isn't rocket science, but then this is also the history of the world, and we're supposed to cover about 5,000 years. So we'll see how it goes. But that's my idea for that first level, is take a content level course, try to address some of these issues we've been talking about with regard to content, but also data, right? And the technology of math and writing, and then sort of get them thinking about how a history class that they thought would have no connection to business data analytics, have no connections to criminal justice, have no connections whatsoever to their accounting 101 class, might actually have some connections to the things that they're doing, right? So I'll stop with that. And I think the next level, again, that Jamie is going to talk about is that tier 2.
Right. So I have a short thing to display here, but after all of the big ideas and creative thinking that Gary shared with us and that we were brainstorming about, this sounds very modest to me.
Yeah,
this is something that we I think see as a starting point, and so yeah. Just to reiterate, very open.
I would reiterate that too. I'm feeling very humbled by all the stuff that Gary's been doing.
But so what we've kind of come up with for the integrative module, a little bit like in the first here, where you have two classes that are sort of paired, but here we want to kind of increase and maybe formalize a little bit more the overlap between these courses. So faculty would be teaching 2 separate courses. We're trying to create a shared space between these disciplines that is represented on the syllabus and on Canvas by a module limited in time to probably about 2 to 3 weeks, a point of contact within these two courses where students in both classes would be completing this module over this period of 2 to 3 weeks. I sort of think of this as like team teaching without officially being team teaching, but maybe for the duration of that module, that would be kind of the model we would have in mind. And so what we have begun to do is to create a template for this module that would have content from the from my side, from ethics related content, but the module would be customizable for each of these tracks. And so the faculty member who is partnering on that module, whether it's Christy in criminal justice or David in business data analytics or anyone else, would contribute content, lecture, would participate in discussions and so forth to make that module relevant for their students as well as for the students in the ethics class. So we have here faculty and student collaboration. Faculty are collaborating prior to and during the course on the design and delivery of the module. Students in both courses are going to be collaborating on the discussions and on some of the group work that we would have them doing. So the module, the idea is the same module would be deployed in both courses, kind of aligned, maybe later in the course, perhaps. And all students in each course would complete the module, but ETHV students, if they are, as we hope most of them will be, simultaneously enrolled in these courses, they would only complete the module once, and that would satisfy criteria or requirements for both courses. But everyone, all of the students would have the benefit, and we hope to some extent that would attract some of them it could be kind of a delayed on-ramp into the certificate program. We would, I think, want to find a way to welcome them into it. But even if they don't do that, we still think there's benefit to them having this experience. The content that we've come up with, I mean, I think this is certainly subject to change and evolution, but a couple of years ago for a workshop, we read and discussed a book by Cathy O'Neil called Weapons of Math Destruction. Some of you may be familiar with this book, some of you may not be, but it is written by a mathematician, and it's a very accessible book, very kind of maybe not easy reading, but it's accessible. It's not an academic, scholarly, specialized book. It's written for an educated general public, and it highlights the misuse of algorithms, which she has dubbed weapons of math destruction. There's a lot of very clever naming in this book. And WMDs are algorithms characterized by opacity, right? They're not transparent. It's difficult to see how they work, by their large scale, and by the harm that they do, whether it's unevenly distributed rewards or bias or some sort of injustice. And so she gives lots of examples of these throughout the book, showing how these kinds of WMDs affect many people, millions and millions of people throughout their lifespan, particularly people who are poor or working class. So there's a lot of overlap here with the Eubanks book. And in fact, Eubanks has a couple of direct quotes from this book. But some examples are the use of automation or algorithms in teacher evaluations, recidivism predictors. There are several that use algorithms in the criminal justice system, college rankings, which are either automated or at least calculated using a prescribed formula, personality tests, which are often used now in the job application process, and can sort of like the Allegheny algorithm can sort of assign a score or a number to a person that may not reflect their individual situation, but can carry a lot of weight. So I think in the book, there are links to a lot of different disciplines. Maybe the only one that doesn't seem obvious to me is biology, Jenna, but I'm sure we could come up with other things sometime over the next couple of years. Other ways to find a connection between ethics and biology. There's plenty there, obviously. And then, so that would be the primary text for the module as currently conceived, and then additional content would be provided by each partner faculty member as we kind of customize these modules. So then as far as the pedagogy, I mean, I again, very modest here. I think we are in need of some more ideas about how to build this out. But this is really based on what I've done just in my own ethics class for kind of trying to develop the basic template for this module. I've had students read the first couple of chapters of the book. At that point, we could have faculty provide discipline-specific lectures or offering their own perspective on what O'Neill is doing and the implications. Faculty could also come together for a joint discussion, either with each other, creating maybe a video or a podcast type product that students could watch, but that could also be used in other ways, perhaps. Or we could even, kind of as Greg was suggesting, bring the classes together, either electronically or in person, depending on logistics, for a larger discussion of the material. And then I've had students kind of jigsaw the rest. So dividing up the chapters, assigning a chapter to each group, a different chapter to each group, so that these smaller groups, and we would hope to mix the groups of students so they are interacting with students from a different class. Having them read and discuss their assigned chapter, individually write a short paper to kind of prepare for getting together with their group members and preparing a group presentation either on one of the particular WMDs from their chapter, or perhaps some other related topic that might be more current, more relevant. That was basically what I had students do in this 2.5 week period, was read a few chapters, write a short paper to kind of organize their thoughts, and then come together with their group members after having written that paper and organized their thoughts to kind of identify together what are the key points that we want to communicate to the rest of the class about this particular algorithm and how it could be ethically evaluated. Of course, discipline-specific assignments could be added on during or after the module if somebody wanted to work with this material in a way that was more focused on their own course's goals. That's certainly possible. Other ideas that we've had, I mean, bringing both classes together for a discussion. I mentioned creating and discussing relevant case studies. That case study approach makes a lot of sense in the context of ethics. And I've done a little bit of that, but I think I will do more of that moving forward. Or having students conduct an ethics review, similar, maybe scaled down, but still somewhat similar to the Allegheny ethics review, or what is sometimes called an algorithmic audit. And Kathy O'Neill, the author, actually has established a consultancy to do just that. And so she's got a website, and you can go and you can see some samples of her work and see what she's up to now. So that is what I have to say about Tier 2's integrative module. And I just wanted to end with a few questions that might help to steer discussion in a few minutes after I give David a turn to talk about the service seminar. So ways to increase the integrative aspect of this module. Think about content from your discipline that might help fill out this module. And thinking about how this approach could serve your course and program goals. Those are things that we'd be interested in hearing from you about. All right, so I'll stop my share there. And David, if you want to take over.
Yeah, all right. I'm working on sharing. I'm trying to find where I share my entire screen.
Yeah,
well,
take your time.
Yeah.
No,
I
one of
think-
the things, I appreciated Jamie's presentation. I tend to go way too fast and just figure everybody's ready to move on. But one of the things that's really integral to that first tier, and based on everything we've been talking about, is trying to set them up with a process of learning, right, in that first tier that kind of gets them excited and gets them on that track we're wanting. So I'd really be pleased to have ideas about that. And then the other thing I left out, which is because I was going too fast, is that I've very kindly been able to send out some invitations, and they've been kindly accepted from Christy and David and Lori Steiner, and a museum director, whereby they're going to come in and tell us a little bit about criminal justice and the law and history and the human condition. Tell us a little bit about math, so that we kind of get a little taste in real time of other specialists coming into the class and showing how history is important to math and history is important to criminal justice and data analytics is important to history, right? So that's one of the cool things that is going to come out of this, that students will get to see a lot of flurry of activity in the classroom.
Cool. I think I can share this. Is it sharing?
Yes, I see you.
Yeah.
I see something happening.
Yeah. So it's sharing my desktop, but not what I want. That's weird. It used to give me the option to share the entire monitor and its contents, but now I'm just having to select the. All right, let's see.
There you go.
Seeing my
Yeah.
PowerPoint now?
There it is.
All right, so for this, we're imagining a 1-credit seminar that's kind of like a capstone experience for these students who participate in the credential, in the certification certificate. 1-credit course, but we kind of want to leave it open-ended because, we're going to have students who are ready or able to take this at any point in time. And we also want to leave it open-ended for students who aren't in the certificate. Just let students come in and experience this discussion about technology and human values. So pretty open-ended, but of course, majority of students will be probably having at least 1 or 2 of the prior courses in the certificate, and then be joining this after doing that. And those students can be leaders for the others. And so that's the fundamental idea for framing the course. It's 1 credit, it's led by 1 professor, but with contributions from others of us. I'm going to cut just to the bare basics, and I'm not going to go through all my slides, but then I'll leave it open for questions. And this is merely a draft based on discussions we've had among the 4 of us in previous meetings. But we're imagining a course, 15 weeks of course meetings, using the first 2 to 3 weeks to set things up by reviewing and filling in the students who are they're first timers, reviewing for others. Now that analytics ends up being kind of a thing that's got its tentacles everywhere. And so I'm using it as a thing from which we can reach discussions related to human values in all of our various disciplines. So forgive me, it could go in other directions in the future, but that's sort of what we discussed to date. There is a standard process for predictive analytics, right? And so this might or might not be introduced previously in a student's experience, but we could certainly introduce it here to kind of set a stage. And that can provide us then a basic framework for beginning to break down into parts a predictive analytics process, such as the Allegheny example, to use it as a case study, review that case, talk about problematic parts of the process, review one of O'Neill's cases similarly, right? Just to get people's blood flowing and their brains thinking. And then we could begin to think about, and I think this would be a really great thing to do, use that framework to then talk about enhancing it so that we could actually find points in this process to ask the ethical questions. And so as an example, and I'm going to jump forward briefly. Are you still seeing my PowerPoint or not?
No, we lost it.
Yeah, this thing is dumb. I'm going to share it differently now. Are you seeing my PowerPoint now?
Now we are.
Good. All right, so here's a image of a standard process, and it goes, you see that idea of iterating over time and working through a series of steps and then coming back around to them, revisiting them, evaluating, etc. But all these, this has been developed, it's been around for over 20 years, and people use it, you know, just as a great standard process for making sure the work is done well. And it includes that feedback loop, which is really important. But one of the things it doesn't include is a focus place to ask the questions about ethical impact. So if we thought about breaking this down, and it basically goes through business understanding, understanding the context that we're working in, understanding the goals we want to achieve, what data do we have to work with, etc. And then reaching a point where we develop models, evaluate their performance, their accuracy, etc. And then deploy them. Well, deploying isn't the end of it, right? We have to circle back and evaluate it. And that could send us in any direction to go back and evaluate the model again, tweak the model, update it, or maybe we need to revisit our fundamental questions and goals. And so we go back through the whole process again. That's just a standard assumption in the data mining process. Well, we can leverage that, and we can bring in something like Eubank's Hippocratic Oath that she drafted. And here are a couple of highlights. I will respect all people, understanding that they are experts in their own lives. I will not facilitate ubiquitous surveillance. I will create bridges, not barriers, for human potential, right? And so if we start to bring in those kinds of insights and, you know, obligations and responsibilities, then we can go back to business understanding and ask who's affected. What are the potential negative impacts? Go to data understanding and ask, do we really have the data we need to deliver value? Do we need more, better data? Do we actually already have data that we shouldn't have or shouldn't be using? What data limits do we need to work within, right, given the context we're working in? We can ask questions like that. We can cut forward and go on the deployment end of some things and think, do we have appropriate checks and balances in place to guide truly wise and effective responsible decision making? What are the unintended negative consequences? And I think that should be a fundamental question always, right, in these projects. These are things we could apply to other kinds of technology, obviously. But then it occurred to me, based especially on this Allegheny example, and I did a little bit of reading, that there's increasingly a notion of human rights impact assessment, and there's also human health impact assessment. And I think this should be just like environmental assessment, environmental impact assessment in a construction project. This should become standard practice, especially when it's directly related to problems impacting, clearly impacting human ethics and policy, right? And so you could view that either small up there at the beginning and end, or you could view it large to really encompass almost everything, which is really, I think, the most appropriate. And we just build that into our process and use something like, I want to find somebody's audit, right? The audit like O'Neill has developed to help get at this, and then I'll help the students. So here's what I would do. So if I were designing this, I would have the students develop an audit that address those questions. And that would be sort of the way they round off their first 3 weeks and have a draft audit underway to ask those human impact questions. And then we bring in guest speakers. I want to see, when I present that, are you still seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. Seeing the presentation. So imagine guest speakers. Maybe we spend 8 weeks bringing in people like Will Graves about student data. What are these surveys we're trying to get you to take as freshmen and seniors, et cetera? What is the intended outcome? How do you feel about these? Are there, you know, and talk with Will about all the things related to that. Have him come in and present, dialogue with him, and then perhaps the next week, you know, ask the questions from our audit regarding that. Then bring in local law enforcement. Christy mentioned that there's currently some really interesting work trying to identify crime hotspots in Wichita. And our police department is working on actually improving and adapting its analytically educated way of doing this. And there's a number of obviously impactful questions to be asked regarding that. Gosh, the questions that we discussed with Lindsay about the impact of some of these new technologies on people in the social work system, right? Various processes that we have in the state of Kansas, right? It'd be wonderful to bring in somebody like that. And so between dialogue with the expert who's coming in and talking with us about a particular case or kind of project they're a part of, and then a follow-up discussion probably the next week, you know, be dialoguing about these questions together, revisiting our audit, asking where that audit really impacts the kind of case that we're looking at here. And then the final part of the course would be maybe 4 or 5 weeks, where the process would be that students choose one of the problems presented during the semester. This could be done probably in groups, and then they dig in and evaluate it. I would love to see us, the reason I suggested 4 to 5 weeks is because like week 3 or 4, I would love to have the experts come back in and view basic presentations from our students and dialogue with us about these. We get to ask the questions that we want to follow up with, et cetera. And then based on that feedback, they can go back and refine a group presentation. Then we've talked about them developing papers over time. They could go back and enhance their individual papers that become part of a portfolio that they could have as a result of their work. So those are my ideas to date based upon previous discussion, and I've really innovated on that a little bit, and I will stop there.
So we've given you sort of some of the pieces of that certificate, and thinking about sort of the entry level, just getting people warmed up to the idea, the more intentionally integrated level with Jamie's class, and then the more experiential, trying to bring in experiential, and then also reinforcing some things that they learned in that 1-hour class. There are certainly other elements to it, but we wanted to sort of highlight those. And again, you have the whole iteration in written form in your email box. And it is, again, a work in progress. So any questions that you have right now, any feedback that you have right now would be greatly appreciated.
A
Go
few
ahead.
quick comments on David's part of the presentation. One, I love the analogy with the environmental impact assessment, to have a human impact assessment. I want to state the obvious, that that's so consistent with our mission for social justice. Also, I like the idea of them doing that evaluation, and I just want to remind us all that, you know, a couple of years ago we did have that presentation where, do you remember that little website where you could play around with cutoff values and you could adjust? It may have been in criminal justice decision making, but also some other things. But we got to play around a little bit, and if you adjusted certain criterion values, you could watch the changes in the false positives and the false negatives. And I don't know if that particularly is exactly what we want to do, but I would like to encourage us to look at, you know, as part of that assessment, that one of the tools we could use is that matrix of true positives, true negatives, false positives, false negatives. And that involves or provides an opportunity for a lot of discussion about criteria, cutoffs, and costs, and how much are we willing to, how many of what type of errors are we willing to make? I just think there could be a lot of really fruitful discussions around that. And so that matrix could be a great tool for that.
Absolutely, totally agree.
And again, some of this presentation that David's been working on, for those of us who've been working closely with David on this is some of the first time we're hearing this. And again, I appreciate that idea of the human impact assessment as certainly being mission driven. And I also like the idea I don't know how to say this properly, but I just will. This kind of idea of crafting a model that relates to human impact assessment has research potential for faculty beyond the student level, right? So if this is something that faculty in general have a desire to develop and work on more, that could also be attractive not only for students and student research, but faculty in general, doing their own research agendas. So good job on that.
I wanted to also throw in, especially in light of the university's adoption of the Laudato Si kind of initiative, environmental impact and human impact are not really different things necessarily. So I think that it would make sense to just include those together as a more comprehensive values-based impact assessment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm accepting applicants for co-authors. So anybody who would like to.
Very cool.
And along the lines of faculty and student research, it's always worth reminding people that the Gerber Institute is constantly begging people to apply for funding for things like that. And with Laudato Si, that would be something they would certainly be interested in funding.
I think also something that relates to human values and technology, they'd be interested in funding as well. But yeah, other thoughts. Suggestions at this point. You can put the brakes on too, if you like, because I know what we're suggesting can be kind of lofty, and we've already had, as Lindsay brought in, what about transfer students? There are lots of sort of impediments, barriers. There are lots of sort of challenges to cope with in something like this.
Like Gary pointed out, a lot of times those are the things that have really bogged us down in trying to do innovative things at Newman too. So just the administrative stuff.
I mean, one of the challenges, just to give an example that we've talked about, and I'm not sure we've resolved everything around it, but I mean, we want this, of course, to be a student-centered delivery structure. And so we're cognizant of the fact that many of these students will be partially or entirely online. We need to have ways for those students to engage in this program. And sometimes that can make some of these things that we want to do challenging.
I will say that one of the things that I've appreciated about our discussions today is we're continually sort of hatching big ideas, and then pretty quickly we're like, okay, how do we make this manageable for our first iteration, right? So we get it up and running efficiently and effectively, right? And I really appreciate that about the group today, because I think that making sure that we get something that works up and running and then treating it as an iterative process, I think will be really important.
Yeah, I was encouraged when I heard Gary talking about it's not necessary to take an entire course and make it experiential. Just find something that you can do, start, and then go back and make it better.
And I think that's one of the things, I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but that's one of the things that I'd be most appreciative of. I think the whole team would, who's been working so far. And now you're part of the team, so sorry, you're sucked in, is taking a look at the prototype that we put up at Canvas and now in your email boxes. And, you know, goodness sakes, between now and say Friday would be great, but between now and next Sunday for sure, breaking it down, looking for problems, looking for things we didn't consider, especially in light of all this new approaches that Gary's been working on that I'd never considered before. This idea of iterative student peer review from the beginning up to the culmination. That's really nice. So anything that you can think of that helps us to make this more practical, more aspirational, more effective. It would be wonderful if you could take a little time to take a look at that draft and just, you know, mark it up, change it up, and send us the results. Because the goal is on Monday or before Monday, Jamie and I, or whoever wants to, is going to sit down and look at all of your suggestions and see how we can put them together for a discussion on Monday.
One of the things I'm curious about was, would it be helpful if I put up our learning agreements and how we send students into the field with predetermined objectives that they have to meet and behaviors that we want to see those students have, and maybe that way we have something to work off of for when you send a student out to a field internship. How do we figure that out? The second thing that comes to mind that I kind of started to write some notes that I'll drop in the in our after discussion is just about backwards design and how we can be more intentional about selecting the right activities based off of what our learning objectives are, instead of the other way around, trying to find a cool activity and then figuring out where it fits in the learning objective. And that if we can switch the design around, it might be easier to select good experiential opportunities for students.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, very good, very good.
I was thinking about that too, you know, articulating outcomes for the entire program. Like, are there certain things about technology that and human values that we just want to make sure students know about? And so obviously, you know, typically we talk about formulating objectives and then, you know, working towards those objectives. But I do think there's also room for just doing it and see what emerges out of that. Because like when you do a rubric for a paper, you know, sometimes like, let's just say, take something really stupid. Maybe in the paper, everybody misspells words and you're like, oh, well, I didn't count for that. So spelling should be part of my rubric, you know? So, you know, we can have both of those. But I do think it would be fun to play around with outcomes and, but also just to continue to stay open to what we sort of learn by surprise.
Excellent, excellent. We do have some outcomes that we presented to the NEH, as these were our desired outcomes, but those are absolutely up for discussion, toss them out, develop them. And so I'll be happy to post those specifically at Canvas if that's helpful as well.
I have a question from completely the other side. And that is, why would a student want to take this?
Because it's cool, you know, but I think honestly that really is kind of an answer, but you're absolutely right that we can be as enthusiastic about this as we want, but we do have to be able, I mean, we don't, some of us, maybe David likes the terms, a lot of us don't like the word selling things to students, you know. But we do have to be able to sell things and market things, and if we're excited about something, how are we going to communicate that to students? So I think that's a really awesome question, Gary. How would we say that? Because to be honest, I don't think we've done a good job of that with the NSP to get students excited about and tell why we think this is important.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes to my mind is it's an easy sell to my majors, right, in business data analytics. And a couple of things that would do for my majors, which I think it could do for others, is it gives them an agenda as they work through their gen eds, frankly, you know, would be one really positive thing. So let me tell you how you can really milk all the value you can out of your gen ed, you know, education and the NSP process. So yeah, I like thinking about selling, because really it's thinking about how do I help students understand the value. Right. So
Yep. It's basically the value proposition. So what is a value proposition that from their perspective? I mean, I think we might know that it's fundamentally, this is critical for them to do for their futures, but they've got to see that value, especially if it's optional. If you're making it optional and not required, there's got to be a well-articulated value that they understand, as well for the faculty that get involved. The people doing the extra work, doing all these combinations, what is the value proposition you providing them?
Well, I'm not a marketing guy, but I know that sometimes in marketing, they talk about marketing as being able to tell a good story. And, so we might think about stories we start with, and like, I don't exactly know how we would implement this, but like, for example, if people read the book we just read, they might get really interested in the implications of these data management systems or something, so we might be able to provide them with a story or an experience that could be kind of a recruiting tool. Now, how we do that for all students, I don't necessarily know.
Another thing that I've heard marketing people say is, to sell somebody something, you have to find their pain and then promise to fix their pain. And kind of following up on what David said, I mean, for some of our students, and I can't believe this, but some of our students apparently perceive the humanities requirements in the gen ed as somewhat painful, not things that they are excited, not courses they are excited about taking. But if we can present this as a pathway through part of the gen ed that links these courses in the humanities more directly into their home discipline and creates those connections in a way that is substantive, then that may make those courses more interesting and relevant to them, and may make the gen ed experience a little different for them.
I'm sure Newman's very different to WSU, but there are faculty that feel the same, that gen eds are an unnecessary evil that we've got to navigate. So I think that would be the value add. It's kind of reaching out, showing connections, showing those links. How can we help you be better in your cause by integrating or combining a gen ed, killing two birds with one? So those sort of things are kind of, and I think, I mean, the way I mentioned it is because it's really part of what drives me is there's got to be value in there for sustainability. And if you think about those early on, they might help influence some of your learning, your objectives that you're trying to achieve.
Do you remember a couple of years ago, we watched that video by the person that presented for us, and she was talking about those 9 things or whatever it was that are coming, and technology and all the ethical things with that. I shared that with my kids, and my son's a little terrified of the idea of hybrid humans, which they say is kind of on the way. But something like that, a short video, a thing about here's what's coming. I mean, that something like that can be really stimulating to people and raise a lot of their concern about the ethical implications of that, and that could be a good intro to funnel people into this program. Again, the question then is, how do we make that sort of initial experience as widely available as possible? But we can find people's pain, but sometimes we can create that pain by showing them this video and saying, here's what's coming. And oh my gosh, okay, let's talk about this, because you all are the ones that are going to be voting on the legislation and all that kind of stuff.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a talk with our advancement office with Clark and James Sanney, and told them that I had some very nice faculty members who are here today who are coming to my classroom, and I haven't talked to any of you guys about this. And wouldn't it be great if I could film them in my classroom, and then maybe you could take them away to some very nice looking studio. And between talking with them and then my classroom footage, we can put together a nice little TED Talk on the importance of math and the human condition in human history. And it'd be just a short thing, right? My point was that I could use it for my classes. It would be like an introduction. Oh, Lori Steiner's coming tomorrow to talk about math and history, so it's going to be great. Look at this little video she made. And the advancement office got so excited, because they know that they can use this on our YouTube channel. They can use this to help encourage faculty to do some podcasting. They're after you. And that these kinds of things will help them promote the faculty at Newman, but also promote the programs that we're doing and the innovation that we're doing here at Newman University. And it is the easiest way for that group on campus, for the marketing group on campus, to promote the liberal arts, the humanities, because they've got video, right? So it's a really interesting idea that Greg's coming up with here on, let's have a video that's scary. Well, Lee's is pretty scary. He's talking about Lee Johnson, and I think that her video is still here at Canvas, and it is pretty good and scary. And she's got a great deadpan delivery that makes you just want to be afraid to take her classes. But yeah, no, there's something that we can do there in that regard.
Well, it is just a little after 12:30. And it's kind of a lot to process, and it's hard to give really substantive feedback just on the spot. But this is really, in a sense, the workshop aspect of this workshop. We want to workshop our draft. And so you have it, as Cheryl said, the written version in your inbox, and we are asking you to look through it and note your questions, your suggestions, your solutions to our pain over the coming few days. Over the weekend, Cheryl and I are going to get together and try to incorporate as much of your feedback as we can. I'm sure some things won't get incorporated, but we want to present a revised version of our draft for additional discussion next Monday. And that will be a more interesting discussion the more of your feedback we receive. So that is going to be an in-person meeting as well. I guess I might say be aware that we might have to adjust the schedule a little bit. Cheryl, of course, we don't have an assessment expert who's
Oh, that's okay. We'll have plenty of time to workshop and think about assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are also having people from campus outside this group are coming, right? So we're going to have career services show up. We're going to have, is Student Life coming? I can't remember. We're going to have, who else is coming? Shoot, sorry.
Clark and
Advancement.
James from
Jay.
media, possibly somebody from admissions.
Enrollment management, right. So we have some folks who are coming into it cold, and we're going to be asking them for their feedback as well. So yeah, it could be a lot of fun. I have no idea how many people are going to be there. Probably somewhere between the 10 of us and another 4 or 5 folks. So it'll be a nice get together.
So we'll have kind of a panel discussion with them and leading into lunch, and then we'll feed everybody and send everybody away happy, I hope.
And they will all have Gary's question. Why do I want to take this if I'm a student? Why would this make me want to come to Newman University? Right? That's going to be their big question. And I think that's a really important one. We're also going to feed you. So we're bringing in some coffee, and I think, Jamie, if we can manage it, we're going to go by La Galette and pick up some lovely pastries and some coffee. And then our lovely dining services at Newman University will feed us for lunch. The other thing to note, you've probably been taking note of this, the city of Wichita has gone back to a masking ordinance because COVID rates are up. Newman University has not yet done something like that, but just do be aware, be kind and considerate of others. And and again, if we hear any policy coming forward for Newman starting next week, we'll let you know. But so COVID's back on the rise again. So just in time for us to gather.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Great. Well, we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you next week. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much for your time and your contributions. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
Whew. How are we doing, guys? Do we need to wrap up anything? Are we happy? Are we good?
Yeah, so you think for Monday, just go with 9 o'clock? And I was just looking at the schedule. I put 8:50 Zoom room opens for the session where we're meeting in person. That was,
Oh,
we'll call that a typo.
we'll remind him. We need to give Gary instructions on how to get there. So,
And
yeah.
we're still having a Zoom option anyway, aren't we?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we were.
Because I think I remember I sent out a Zoom option for that meeting anyway, just in case people couldn't come. So yeah,
Couldn't be there, what have you.
Right, yeah, we did talk about that.
So Rachel, this is awful to ask you, but are you willing to run that Zoom option? I'm trying to think in that particular room in the alumni center. I've been told Zooming is kind of more problematic than other places. But I
a
don't-
little bit, but hopefully we just don't have anyone that Zooms. But if we do, I've Zoomed in there before, so I can definitely set it up. It is under your Zoom, so you might need to log in.
What's that about? Okay.
But
we
it,
Need to
don't-
bring a laptop or anything, or?
I'm gonna bring my laptop just in case anyway, so I can keep minutes since Cheryl asked me to do that. So
Yeah.
worst comes to worst, I have my laptop and we can figure that out. So
Okay, cool. Cool.
What about a camera?
yeah, there's a camera in there. And it moves a little bit, but it basically stays pretty much on the podium. So yeah, if we do have someone zoom in, it's not like they're gonna have a camera that can move around as easy as like Caritas, but yeah.
Yeah, that's just gonna have to be okay. And they're, you know, they can, perhaps, the best way they can interact is to ask questions in the chat and we can relay those questions. So.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think everything's good to go. Great Western got back to me. The meal's ready to go. They're gonna have a fruit plate as well, so hopefully it's not just melons. Or whatever. Like,
Excellent.
no melons. But yeah, I think it's gonna be good.
Okay, and Jamie, you're gonna pick up coffee and croissant, I hear, right?
Yeah, and you're gonna
Okay.
order those?
I am. I was at La Galette earlier this week, and they said basically they open at 8:30. So I told them if I do an order, can we just swing by and pick it up?
Yeah.
So we're gonna do that. So I'll just get that ordered and paid for, and then I
It's
haven't.
later than I would have thought for such a breakfasty place.
Yeah, well, there you go. So, would you rather do something else?
No, I think that should be fine. I mean, if we're meeting at 9, then I can be there at 8:30 and that should be fine.
Okay, and did you want to swing by, you said you were gonna swing by Starbucks as well?
Yeah, there's a Starbucks just right up from my house. So
Oh, well, which one? Or do you want to order the coffee there? You do have to order that in advance if you want to get those takeaways.
yeah. Well, let's do that. That's a good point. You were probably thinking the one over right by campus, which is
Yeah, I
okay.
was.
I do live really close to the one at 21st and Amadon.
Gotcha.
And so I could hit that and then come down to La Galette
Perfect.
and have everything in my car by 8:40.
Perfect. Okay, so, they do those big things. Those are supposed to be good for, I think, 12 cups of coffee. So I guess we need 2, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and I hadn't planned on making one of them decaf.
I think in the morning, most people want caffeine or they're willing to do without coffee.
I should hope. Okay. All righty. So I will call them up. I just have that credit card and I actually have the sales tax number. So maybe they'll honor that and let me do
Should
that
I
over the
should I
phone.
grab maybe a couple of bottles of orange juice and some plastic cups that we could have for people who don't want
That is
coffee? I mean, that would be
totally
real
up to
easy.
you. That is totally up to you. My mantra these days is less is more. So that is totally up to you.
I can bring like a water pitcher or something for the morning too, if we need to.
Okay.
To have something besides coffee, you can have some water, so.
Do that, or we could ask Great Western to provide you some water at 8:30.
They'd be willing to do that too, so whatever.
They would.
Totally up to you guys.
I think people will, besides coffee, and even then people will bring their own beverages, like in the morning, I feel like a lot of people bring a cup with them, of
A lot of
something.
people have water bottles. And
Yeah, yeah.
Portable.
So I think just coffee would be fine in the morning and the breakfast, so.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I will be asking both the Starbucks folks and the La Galette people to give us napkins and cups and things like that. But you might just iterate that, especially to the Starbucks folks. We need cups and lots of them, and napkins and lots of them. So just, I
So
guess that's
two
the only other thing I can think of.
Coffee from 21st and Amadon, Starbucks, and whatever sounds good from La Galette. And I will pick it all up. and
Excellent. Thank you.
Shortly before 9 o'clock on Monday. And I guess we can email Cheryl about when to, maybe, I'm sure we'll need to talk a little bit about feedback we're getting and revisions. So we
Sure,
can
sure. And I
set
hope
up
we
a
get a
time to-
lot. I hope we get a lot, and I hope we get some sooner rather than later.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, cool, cool. And I'm still striving for a clean presentation of the certificate, and I'm not there. I'm just not at a point where I have a nice, clean, crisp, single piece of paper presentation, right?
I had a little minor crisis yesterday afternoon. I just felt like I have no idea what this shared module is anymore. I just don't even know what we're trying to do. And I mean, Gary's presentation was great, but it didn't really make me feel better. It's like, wow, there's so much that is possible, and there's so much going on over there. And I'm just like worried about, like, how am I going to get a discussion group with students from 2 different classes involved? And, you know, I think there's a long way to go, but I did appreciate, like I said, his idea of start small and then,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
make it better.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think you made a great start, and don't be worried. There, you can't do everything. You can't meet all our goals and objectives in one course or one module. But I do think there's some potential there for thinking about digital presentations and podcasts and conversations, right? I don't know. And I do really like his idea of having board meetings. I mean, that's pretty darn cool. Board meetings can happen in person, board meetings can happen in virtual world. That was a really nice approach that I hadn't considered. So that's really neat. I like that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, there's some great ideas.
Yeah. Oh, okay then. Well,
I like you give them a 2-week remediation period before you fire them. You know, that was good too. Like, you don't just fire them. You're like, here, we're gonna give you an improvement plan.
there you go. HR.
Yeah, totally HR. So
Okay, well, great. Well, I thought yesterday went very, very well. Today, I thought Gary's presentation was terrific. I thought we got them thinking about a model. But yeah, this was a good group of lively people, and they talked a lot. And so Monday should be good. Did you guys get an invitation from Alden on dinner and such?
Yeah.
Good, okay. Melanie had left one person off the list when she first sent it out, so I was kind of reluctant to talk about it. And so I just thought, be sure and get in there and make sure, if you can go, please go ahead and accept. If you can't go, that's okay too. But I was impressed that that invitation came out, because Alden's been talking about it for a long time. And it finally came out. So that was nice.
yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, then. All righty. Well, listen, thanks so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
likewise, thank you.
Yeah, let me know if you guys need anything at all. So
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All righty. Well, we'll talk, I'm sure, via electronically or something, but otherwise, I guess the only thing I'm a little concerned about is, like I say, the city of Wichita and its official buildings and such has gone back to masking.
I didn't know that till you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, are we worried about anything? I mean, we just go ahead and not worry about table setup and just leave it.
I mean, there's enough tables in there that everyone could probably have their own little round table. And I think that would be smart, probably. give
And
people.
just
an
sort of
opportunity
leave
to-
it the way it is, kind of tables.
Yeah,
everywhere.
kind of spread out. Yeah, I think that would probably just be
Okay.
best.
All right. And I
Mhm.
guess if people are really concerned, they just won't come and they'll zoom
Yeah.
in.
Or they can wear masks, whatever they want to do. So.
Right.
And we'll want to remind them in our kind of end of week email that, you know, there is a Zoom option, and
Yeah.
so use your own best judgment.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It won't be as good, but
Yeah.
it'll be there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks for your patience on that and all your advice and. Okay. All right.
Have a
Yay,
great
time-
rest of your day.
Yes,
You
have a great
too.
day.
Time for lunch and grading.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.